Uttar Pradesh. Action-packed 60 minutes. I'm Gaurav Sawant. Let's get started with the headlines at 3. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar meets his Chinese counterpart in a crucial bilateral on the sidelines of G20 foreign ministers' visit. Jaishankar also meets US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Clear edge for the BJP in Tripura. BJP leads in 34 of 60 seats. Left and Congress lead in 14. And Tripura Motha leads in 11. Modi's victory lap at 7 p.m. in the national capital. BJP, NDPP near two-thirds majority in Nagaland. BJP hopes to form the government with NPP in Meghalaya amidst the split verdict. Supreme Court orders SEBI probe on alleged manipulation of stock prices in Adani Hindenburg case, says report to an expert panel within 2 months. Adani welcomes the move, says truth shall prevail. Big Supreme Court verdict on appointment of Election Commission Chief. The Apex Court says CEC must be appointed like the CBI chief by a panel comprising the Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition in Parliament and the Chief Justice of India. Bulldozers roll into Prayagraj for the second straight day. Another house linked to Umesh Pal murder accused raised. The house belongs to gangster turned Neta Atiq Ahmed's key aide. It's India's moment on the big global stage. India's presidency in G20. We're talking about the G20 foreign ministers' visit. But very crucial bilaterals also taking place. And let's talk about the India-China bilateral that's currently underway. And this is the first India-China talks at the level of the foreign ministers here since the LAC standoff. All important India-China bilateral at the level of the foreign ministers currently underway. This is a meeting between External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and Gangchun. The meeting that's currently underway, Dr. Jaishankar is meeting his Chinese counterpart. Will this lead to dialing down of tensions along the line of actual control and a restoration of April-May 2020 scenario? I quickly want to cut across to India Today's Foreign Affairs editor Geeta Mohan joining us for more on the story. So Geeta, this is a very crucial bilateral of the foreign ministers on the sidelines of the G20. Do we realistically expect dialing down of tensions along the LAC?
Well, the fact that he is a new foreign minister who's come after President Xi Jinping took over for the third time is messaging in itself. These are meetings, Gaurav, that China is not going to miss. But having a bilateral on the sideline is significant, and not just one. We are being told that there could be a second one with Ajit Doval, since he's tipped to be a state councillor soon, and will become the special representative on border talks as well. So this could very well set the tone and tenor for how India-China relations are going to look in coming months, just ahead of a presidential visit by President Xi Jinping, either for the SCO summit or for the G20 summit. India is going to be very firm on what it wants. Dr. Jaishankar has been very, very clear about that there is no other option. It cannot be business as usual unless China pushes back and withdraws from areas that were traditionally held by the Indian side. Having said that, there is also realization that at this point in time, there are no alternatives to China when it comes to supply chains, and therefore we've seen a growth in trade between the two sides. There are other concerns that could be raised with regards to visas, with regards to students who want to return to China and join the universities that they're studying in. So there are a lot of areas of concern, but this certainly is an important visit, also a very big one at that, when the bilateral talks are taking place. The first high-level engagement since March 2022, when Wang Yi as foreign minister visited India. And again, there have been a lot of problems. The Chinese side come from a position of strength, not because they're strong, but because Xi Jinping has got a third term. So Xi Gang has come with a mandate, and we'll have to wait and see what that mandate really is. What's the messaging?
The fact that there is a conversation that is taking place between the two foreign ministers, the fact that the new foreign minister could as we're told, would also be the state councillor and the special representative on border talks. So, and a dialogue with the National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. What's extremely interesting, Geeta, what would be extremely interesting to see India insisting it cannot be business as usual or relationship as usual until China pulls back and restores the April-May 2020 situation. So is there a middle ground on that? What's the road ahead? What's the way forward on this?
Well, Gaurav, to be very, very clear, there is no middle ground when it comes to the eastern Ladakh sector, where we still have Chinese forces sitting in areas that make India uncomfortable because they were traditionally held by the Indian side. And there is no middle ground on that. The Chinese will have to go back. Status quo ante is what the Indian side prefer, and they've been very firm about that. So the messaging is not diluted. There is no other message but this one when it comes to the border. But yes, there are going to be conversations on how it needs to be done. We know that the Chinese president himself has had a huge political turmoil within the country, a lot of questions being asked about his own presidency. And at such a time, and the Chinese are focusing not just at the border between India and China, but also Taiwan and the South China Sea. So with all the areas that they're focusing on, for them right now, priority would be Taiwan, but they are certainly not going to let go of the territories very easily when it comes to India. So a lot of conversations. There was a working mechanism meeting that took place in Beijing, for which our Joint Secretary East Asia went for the first time. Shilpak was in Beijing for the meeting. Again, it all has to do with what the statement is going to look like. We're talking about consensus at the G20, Gaurav. At the India-China bilaterals, we've seen no consensus to actually come out with a joint statement in many a meeting, and we see separate statements come out. So we'll have to wait and see whether there's going to be a joint statement or separate statements from New Delhi and from Beijing.
As far as India is concerned, Geeta, this also is extremely critical. We heard Prime Minister Narendra Modi earlier today. The focus, while multilateralism, and the Prime Minister also referred to multilateralism being challenged and being under stress globally, Europe and United States may want to focus on the Russia-Ukraine war. The global south clearly wants the sustainable development goals, energy security, food security, these issues to be on the global high table and to be highlighted equally. Where do India and China stand there? Do we see India, China, Russia move forward on this axis?
Well, Gaurav, interesting question, because it is a very, the two countries are very interestingly poised. Now, when it comes to various issues to do with bilateral, we stand on polar opposite sides. But when it comes to multilateral issues, the fact that multilateralism is in a state of crisis is for everybody to see, because G20, the biggest multilateral bloc, is today a divided house. And in that divided house, China and India uniquely stand on the other side of the spectrum with with Russia, and India enjoys a very, very rare and unique position where they have great ties with Russia as also with the West. So the only country and the only host nation where we'd see maybe full participation, Putin did not turn up in Bali for the G20 summit, but
Yes.
where we could see 100% participation is in India, is in New Delhi. But again, siding or taking a position on Russia and the Russia-Ukraine war does not mean India condones the war, like Prime Minister Modi said. This is not an era of war. But like the Russians say, Gaurav, then that yes, it is not an era of war, but it's not an era of war for either side, not for the West.
Geeta,
if
stay
not
with
for
me
Russia,
for a moment.
certainly not
More
for the West as
breaking
well.
news coming in. And Geeta, big story. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has apologized to India. Sergei Lavrov says he's apologized for the behavior of Western diplomats. Western delegations turned work into a farce, says Lavrov, after some diplomats skipped dinner hosted by the External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar. The Russian Foreign Minister apologized at the G20 meet. Geeta, bring us details. This is global power play or diplomatic war playing out on Indian soil, Geeta.
Absolutely, Gaurav. And it's not the first time. We were talking about it since morning, that they expect fireworks in the room where you have Sergei Lavrov sitting opposite Secretary Blinken, as also the German Foreign Minister, the French Foreign Minister, the European Union delegation. So one expected fireworks. There must have been direct hits at Russia from the Western front, and Russian Foreign Minister again saying that the platform is being misused against Russia, and there is an entire bloc that is working against a forward movement when it comes to G20's agenda. This happened during the finance ministers meet in Bangalore as well. When the G20 finance ministers met, there was a lot of exchange of barbs between the two sides, and there were reports of the German finance minister actually telling the Russians that we know who you are, where you live, and what you've done. So that's the kind of language we're seeing at a multilateral fora, such as the G20 finance ministers and now the foreign ministers meeting. And the Russian side has hit back with Sergei Lavrov saying that this entire thing is a farce and that it's only being used or misused to target Russia.
In fact, Geeta, Prime Minister Narendra Modi made a very interesting statement, and that is something that perhaps the whole world needs to take notice of, where he says no group can claim global leadership without listening to those most impacted by these developments. When we're talking about whether it's SDG, whether Sustainable Development Goals, or we're talking about food security, energy security, if you have to be a global leader, you have to take into account all that's important to the developing countries and not just keep everything hostage to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Geeta.
Absolutely, Gaurav. The messaging over here with India having to host the G20 and hold the presidency for a year, that's going to be quite tumultuous. The voice and the narrative for that India is setting is very, very clear. That while everybody is warring with each other, the fact is that the worst impacted, or the region or countries that are most adversely impacted, is the global south. And in that, talking about voice of the global south, not to ignore the voice of the global south, not to ignore the countries that are impacted adversely and are the worst sufferers, whether if it is the Russia-Ukraine war or, for that matter, climate change. He has been advocating climate justice, messaging to the Western world, to the developed world, that the onus is on them to ensure that climate change is fought well and in an equitable manner. Not just in terms of distribution, but also in terms of taking the blame and responsibility.
Absolutely. Can the West continue to talk down to the global South? That's the question that perhaps Europe, the United States needs to ponder and respond to. Stay with me, Geeta. India is hosting the biggest G20 foreign ministers meet. The External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, is currently holding a bilateral with his Chinese counterpart. Before that, he met US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The two discussed goals to advance India-US relations, extremely crucial relations when it comes to not just bilateral ties, but for the benefit of the entire world. And that's the point, how India and the United States can partner together to meet the needs of the world. The External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, he welcomed all participating foreign ministers. In fact, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in his opening remarks, reiterated India's G20 presidency motto and theme, which is Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, the whole world is one family. The theme of India's presidency, one earth, one family, one future, extremely critical.
They are also the ones most affected by global warming caused by richer countries. This is why India's G20 presidency has tried to give a voice to the global south. No group can claim global leadership without listening to those most affected by its decisions. Excellencies, you are meeting at a time of deep global divisions. As Foreign Minister, it is but natural that your discussions are affected by the geopolitical tensions of the day. We all have our positions and our perspectives on how this tension should be resolved. We must also admit that the tragic consequences of this failure are being faced most of all by the developing countries. After years of progress, we are at risk today of moving back on the sustainable development goals. Many developing countries are struggling with unsustainable debt while trying to ensure food and energy security for their people. We have seen stable economies suddenly overwhelmed by debt and financial crisis. These experiences clearly show the need for resilience in our societies, in our economies, in our healthcare systems, and in our infrastructure. The G20 has a critical role to play in finding the right balance between growth and efficiency on one hand and resilience on the other. We can reach this balance more easily by working together. That is why your meeting is important. I have full trust in your collective wisdom and ability. I am sure that today's meeting will be ambitious, inclusive, action-oriented, and will rise above differences. Excellencies, we must all acknowledge that multilateralism is in crisis today. The architecture of global governance created after the Second World War was to serve two functions. First, to prevent future wars by balancing competing interests. Second, to foster international cooperation on issues of common interests. The experience of the last few years, financial crisis, climate change, pandemic, terrorism, and wars clearly shows that global governance has failed. India has selected the theme of One Earth, One Family, One Future for its G20 presidency. It signals the need for unity of purpose and unity of action. I hope that your meeting today will reflect the spirit of coming together for achieving common and concrete objectives. As the leading economies of the world, we also have a responsibility toward those who are not in this room. The world looks upon the G20 to ease the challenges of growth, development, economic resilience, disaster resilience, financial stability, transnational crime, corruption, terrorism, and food and energy security. In all these areas, the G20 has capacity to build consensus and deliver concrete results.
Excellencies, let us remind ourselves that this grouping bears an exceptional responsibility. We first came together in the midst of a global crisis and are today, once again, actually confronting multiple ones. In considering these issues, we may not always be of one mind. In fact, there are some matters of sharp differences of opinions and views. Yet, we must find common ground and provide direction because that is what the world expects of us. The world must also strive for more reliable and resilient supply chains. Recent experience has underlined the risks of being dependent on limited geographies. Our agenda for today's discussions include the challenges of food, fertilizer, and fuel security. These are truly make or break issues for developing countries. We heard their concerns directly in January this year through the Voice of Global South Summit. Such issues should not be relegated to the periphery of the international discourse. They are, in fact, crucial to the global economy and must be treated as such.
The issues of Global South must not be ignored is the point that India is making. The developed world needs to listen to the developing world. Let me now get you an exclusive conversation that took place on the sidelines of the G20 with US State Department spokesperson Zed Tarar on the US equation with Russia, China, spy balloon, all these episodes. My colleague Geeta Mohan spoke to him. Let's listen in.
G20 की बैठक होने वाली है विदेश मंत्रियों की, लेकिन कंट्रोवर्सीज ऑलरेडी आ चुके हैं. जॉइंट कम्युनिके में कोई कंसेंसस नहीं होगा तो आगे कैसे बढ़ सकता है? कैसे इस युद्ध को रोका जाएगा या रोक पाएगा G20 अगर रूस और चीन साथ नहीं खड़े हों?
थैंक्स गीता. देखिए, राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन ऑफ कोर्स एज यू नो कई दिन पहले वो कीव में थे, तो वहाँ उन्होंने ऊंची आवाज़ में ये कहा कि हम नहीं चाहते कि युद्ध आगे बढ़े, हम चाहते हैं कि ये जल्द से जल्द रोका जाए. लेकिन जो सच है, वो जो हम देख रहे हैं इस वक्त, वो ये कि व्लादिमीर पुतिन बिल्कुल तैयार नहीं है. इस वक्त लगातार मिसाइल बम भेज रहे, लाख उनकी सैनिक सोल्जर्स हैं, जो फौज की जो ट्रूप्स हैं, वो भेज रहे हैं यूक्रेन तक. तो हम समझते हैं कि जो तरीका है, जो रास्ता है इस वक्त, वो ये है कि हमने यूक्रेन को सपोर्ट देना है, उनको हथियार देना है जो डिफेंसिव हथियार है, ताकि वो अपने लोगों को सुरक्षित रख सकें। और हमने पुतिन को एक ही आवाज़ में, ऊंची आवाज़ में हमने ये कहना कि ये जो हम देख रहे हैं ये गलत है और ये नहीं होना चाहिए।
And the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, on a two-day visit to India, has lauded Prime Minister Narendra Modi. After her meeting at Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the Raisina dialogue, Giorgia Meloni appreciated the Prime Minister's highest approval ratings. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's got highest ratings among global leaders, leaving behind the US President Joe Biden and the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is the world's most popular leader for the second consecutive year, according to a US-based survey. Giorgia Meloni is on a two-day visit to India. It's a very, very significant visit where India-Italy ties are being taken to a new level. There's a lot of conversation on cooperation on semiconductors, renewable energy, green hydrogen. This, of course, is also the 75th year of India-Italy relations.
I firmly believe that there's a lot that we can do together, and I'm not sure if this will lead me to the approval rate that the Prime Minister Modi has reached. I think he's the most loved one of all around the world. But I mean, this has really proven that he has been a major leader, and congratulations for that, Prime Minister.
So, high-octane Raisina Dialogue, India's flagship conference on geopolitics and geostrategy, that's kicked off. On the sidelines of this dialogue, Prime Minister Narendra Modi held talks with Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni at the Hyderabad House. Prime Minister Narendra Modi hailed the 75th anniversary of bilateral ties between India and Italy. The Italian Prime Minister, as you just heard, lauded Prime Minister Narendra Modi for having the highest approval ratings in the world. Both leaders have pledged to strengthen bilateral ties. They joined hands to begin defense cooperation. Earlier, of course, the Italian Prime Minister, she paid her respects to Mahatma Gandhi. She offered floral tributes at Rajghat. She was received by Prime Minister Narendra Modi at a ceremonial welcome, according to the Italian Prime Minister, at the forecourt of the Rashtrapati Bhavan. This, of course, is Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's first visit to India on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the relationship between the two countries. Of course, the two Prime Ministers have met in Italy, in Bali, where the Italian Prime Minister and Prime Minister Narendra Modi met during the G20 summit.
एक और क्षेत्र है जो दोनों देश एक नया अध्याय शुरू कर रहे हैं और वो है रक्षा सहयोग का। भारत में डिफेंस मैन्युफैक्चरिंग सेक्टर में को प्रोडक्शन एंड को डेवलपमेंट के अवसर बन रहे हैं जो दोनों देशों के लिए लाभदायक हो सकते हैं। हमने दोनों देशों की सेनाओं के बीच नियमित रूप से जॉइंट एक्सरसाइज और ट्रेनिंग कोर्सेज आयोजित करने का भी निर्णय लिया। आतंकवाद और अलगाववाद के खिलाफ लड़ाई में भारत और इटली कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर चल रहे हैं। हमने इस सहयोग को और मजबूत करने पर विस्तार पूर्वक चर्चा की। एक और क्षेत्र है जो दोनों देश एक नया अध्याय शुरू कर रहे हैं और वो है रक्षा सहयोग का। भारत में डिफेंस मैन्युफैक्चरिंग सेक्टर में को प्रोडक्शन एंड को डेवलपमेंट के अवसर बन रहे हैं जो दोनों देशों के लिए लाभदायक हो सकते हैं। हमने दोनों देशों की यूक्रेन संघर्ष के शुरुआत से ही भारत ने यह स्पष्ट किया है कि इस विवाद को केवल डायलॉग और डिप्लोमेसी के जरिए ही सुलझाया जा सकता है और भारत किसी भी शांति प्रक्रिया में योगदान देने के लिए पूर्ण रूप से तैयार है।
This is my first bilateral visit in this region ever since I took office, and we want to further boost this relation, and this is the reason why we have decided to turn our partnership in a strategic partnership, because we have a very solid relationship. There's a lot to be working on together. Starting from some sectors where we want to enhance our cooperation. Let me mention defense, which was mentioned by the Prime Minister, and energy security. India has set up major objectives in this connection. Prime Minister Modi knows very well Italy's position, which is giving full support to the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and we both hope that India, having the presidency of the G20, may play a central role in facilitating a negotiating process for the cessation of hostilities for a just peace.
Prime Minister, you heard Prime Minister Narendra Modi there. You also heard Giorgia Meloni, both talking about how India can play a role in peace talks between Russia and Ukraine for just peace in Ukraine. But what's the thinking in Beijing about the India-China bilaterals at the level of the foreign ministers of the two countries? We bring you a report from Beijing on the significance of this high-octane India-China bilaterals on the sidelines of the G20 foreign ministers' visit.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry has announced that, at the invitation of External Affairs Minister Subramanyam Jaishankar of G20 President India, Foreign Minister Qin Gang will attend the upcoming G20 Foreign Ministers meeting in New Delhi on Thursday. Of course, he will meet with his Indian counterpart. He will also meet with some of the other big names of the world's largest economies, including Russia's Sergei Lavrov, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and also UK Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, to discuss issues of common concern. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is very likely to be on the agenda, as the gathering of G20 finance ministers in Bengaluru has resulted in discord after Russia and China refused to endorse a press release condemning Moscow's military operation in Ukraine. On that issue, China has made it clear in a 12-point position paper that it calls for a comprehensive ceasefire and gradual de-escalation.
So why this is a very high-octane meet that's happening? One, there are multilateral issues. On the sidelines of the G20 foreign ministers meet, there are also about 39 bilaterals that are taking place at the level of the foreign minister of India and the foreign ministers of these countries. But if we were to talk about specifically the India-China bilaterals, extremely crucial given the tension along the line of actual control, and not just in eastern Ladakh, but also sometimes in the Sikkim sector, sometimes in Arunachal Pradesh. What do we expect from the India-China bilaterals? We get you another report.
As for the bilateral relationship between China and India, actually this is the first high-level visit from China to India since the clash on the line of actual control between the two sides in December 2019. So far, we haven't got any more details of Qin's agenda from Chinese Foreign Ministry, such as whether there will be a bilateral meeting between the two top diplomats. But if there is one, the border issue will very likely to be on the table. Just about a week ago, high-level military commanders from the two sides held a face-to-face meeting on the border issue in Beijing, also the first time since 2019, in which the two sides reviewed the positive progress of previous agreements revolving the disputes and exchanged in-depth views on the next phase of discussions. China's statement says the two sides agreed to actively implement the important consensus reached by the leaders of the two countries and promote the further stabilization of the border situation. So, the two sides are keeping an eye on whether there will be some more progress on the issue. Meanwhile, India's trade deficit with China has grown significantly in recent years. A Chinese report says the number has reached a record height of over $100 billion in 2022. So cooperation on trade and economy, especially during a time of global economic recovery in 2023, will also likely to be on the agenda during the meeting. Other topics, including climate change, people-to-people exchanges, are also likely to be touched upon. But what is clear is that China says it always stands ready to work with all parties to ensure the G20 foreign ministers meeting sends a positive signal on multilateralism.
A quick break at this stage. We'll be tracking developments on this aspect very closely, but on the other side, Supreme Court orders SEBI probe on alleged manipulation of stock prices in the Adani Hindenburg case. Also says this report was to be submitted to an expert panel within 2 months. Gautam Adani welcomes the move, says truth shall prevail.
You are watching India Today.
I think there's an opportunity for India particularly to work with the United States and others.
India is the largest, has the largest vaccine manufacturer in the world.
I thought if it's blowing in the wind, it's best I'm on the motorcycle. And I did 15,000 kilometers in 36 days.
Rich countries have a particular obligation to exercise their investment in innovation.
I believe that global business has the money and the power.
Improvements in the way we understand the importance of education and healthcare.
You have a greater chance of killing yourself than of being killed by any soldier or terrorist or criminal.
Arnold Schwarzenegger is back. The Terminator star is all set to return with an upcoming comedy series titled Fubar.
I'm back, baby.
The drama will address normal family concerns set against a worldwide backdrop of espionage, action and humor, forcing characters to work together as partners.
Back, baby.
Ow! That's what you get for being sentimental. The 8-episodic series will also feature Monica Barbaro, Jay Baruchel, Fortune famester Milan Carter and Travis Van Winkle, among others. Fubar will premiere on 25th May on streaming giant Netflix.
I'm back, baby.
Ow! That's what you get for being sentimental.
In a crowded place, can you just imagine? It's unparalleled, the way it all just happened. If you can't have
Wow singer Sabrina Carpenter and Shawn Mendes are reportedly dating, and the couple was spotted strolling in Los Angeles.
asking what it's like to be loved like this, to be recognized behind the scenes. Make me vulnerable, you make me so vulnerable.
I won't lie to you.
The Treat You Better hitmaker was spotted wearing a pair of blue corduroy pants, a white shirt and a shearling-lined jean jacket for the outing, while Carpenter kept things casual in an oversized black sweatshirt and sneakers.
And you're spending all your time in this wrong situation, and anytime you want it to stop, I know I can treat you better than he can. And any girl like you.
The news of their dating comes as a surprise after Shawn Mendes was reportedly linked romantically with his chiropractor Dr. Jocelyn Miranda. According to reports, the couple has been spending a lot of time together following Shawn Mendes' split from Camila Cabello after 3 years of dating.
I'll stop time for you the second you say you'd like me to.
official talks with the Honorable Prime Minister, both in the restricted format and also in the delegation level format. She also paid her tributes to Mahatma Gandhi at the Rajghat, and thereafter Honorable Prime Minister hosted the Prime Minister of Italy a luncheon at the Hyderabad House. Later during the day, Prime Minister of Italy will also call on Honorable Rashtrapati Ji. Prime Minister Meloni will also participate in the 8th Raisina Dialogue as the chief guest and keynote speaker alongside Prime Minister Modi later this evening. In terms of the substance of discussions and the decisions that and the understanding that the two leaders arrived at, I will just make some broad brush 8 to 10 points which were key takeaways from this meeting. First of all, both the leaders agreed and decided to elevate India-Italy partnership to the level of strategic partnership. As per Italian Prime Minister herself, her visit to India was a matter of strategic choice. The fact that she decided to undertake the first bilateral visit in Asia to India was a strategic choice and not just a routine bilateral visit. 3, Prime Minister of Italy appreciated the leadership of Honorable Prime Minister on matters of regional and global importance, in particular when it comes to concerns, interests and priorities of the global south. 4, the discussions covered the entire gamut of bilateral, regional and global cooperation. 5, and I must mention this important point, both the leaders held discussions in a very warm, cordial, friendly, frank atmosphere between the two leaders. A strong bond of friendship between the two leaders was very, very clearly visible during the discussion.
And I quickly want to cut across to what Dr. S. Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister, has just put out on social media platform Twitter. He said he'd met his Chinese counterpart, met the Chinese Foreign Minister on the sidelines of the G20 Foreign Ministers meet this afternoon. Our discussions were focused on addressing current challenges to the bilateral relationship, especially peace and tranquility in the border areas. We spoke about the G20 agenda. Very, very crucial point being made by India's External Affairs Minister. Discussions were focused on addressing current challenges to bilateral relationships, especially peace and tranquility in the border areas. And I quickly want to cut across to India Today's Shiv Arur for more on this. Shiv, you and I, we both reported very extensively on the India-China standoff at Eastern Ladakh, and India making it very clear this relationship can move forward only when there is peace and tranquility at the LAC.
And Gaurav, that's precisely what was discussed between the two foreign ministers, in this first diplomatic handshake at this level since the standoff began in early 2020. Now, it was always going to be the case that the bilateral relationship, especially the border issue, on what's happening in Eastern Ladakh, was going to be front and center in discussions between the two countries, because unless that is resolved, the actual relationship between India and China stands pretty much paralyzed. Trade is continuing, but there have been offensive actions by both countries against each other, militarily speaking, as well as on the economic side. And therefore, for a full normalization to happen, there is no moving beyond first fixing what's happening in the border issue, in the border areas. And that's the reason why Dr. S. Jaishankar, India's External Affairs Minister, has said they've spoken about all aspects of the bilateral relationship, particularly peace and tranquility in the border areas, which, as you and I know, has been exactly the opposite of that since 2020. As recently as a couple of months ago, a few weeks ago, there have been scuffles happening in different sectors off the line of actual control. We saw it happen most recently in Tawang, in Arunachal Pradesh. The two armies, the two largest standing armies in the world, continue to be in a face-to-face confrontation in eastern Ladakh. There has been some peace over there, but it hasn't in any ways led to a de-induction of the forces there. So therefore, given that both sides at one level already accept that the resolution to what's happening in eastern Ladakh can only be diplomatic, it cannot be military. We have to see this in that context, Gaurav. Remember, there have been 16 rounds of talks between senior corps commanders on both sides in eastern Ladakh, but it is nobody's case that the army has a solution to what's happening in eastern Ladakh. It has to be a high-level diplomatic government-to-government solution, and it is in that context that this handshake between Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and Chan Kang is going to be seen as very, very important. One will have to wait and see whether there's going to be, a longer statement, perhaps a joint statement of some kind, which seems a bit of a stretch at this stage. But to see how the one short paragraph released by Dr. S. Jaishankar will be fleshed out, hopefully, a little bit more.
Shiv, the world's two largest standing armies are facing each other at those frozen heights in Ladakh, and not just in Ladakh, Shiv, all along the 3,500 kilometer long line of actual control from Arunachal Pradesh through Sikkim, through the Barahoti sector, through eastern Ladakh. This situation remains extremely tense, and India is not giving in to Chinese bullying tactics or pressure tactics. There is no give as far as India is concerned, and Dr. S. Jaishankar also makes that very clear.
He's made it very clear, and he's said it before this as well. Just before the G20 foreign ministers meet, Dr. S. Jaishankar has been on record over the politics over what's happening on the China border. He's made it very clear that the strong actions that were taken by this government to send the armies over there. But, the fact is, with 3 winters gone off this particular standoff, China not being able to, meet the larger objectives that it wanted to, meet, as a result of this huge deployment in the Tibetan sector, means that even China feels stuck. India has been very clear, Gaurav, from the start, as you've reported, that status quo ante, which means moving to a status quo before May 2020, is the minimum that India is looking at this point of time, which means a de-induction of, at least 2 divisions worth of forces from the Chinese side and an equal amount of force deployment on the Indian side. That is the starting point of what India is willing to actually look at when it's talking about normalization of these bilateral relationships that the 2 ministers are speaking about at this point of time. But to reach that point, it's going to have to take a huge amount, a gargantuan diplomatic effort on both sides, because, there may be a perception to many here in India that China has the upper hand and India is on the defensive, when in many sectors, as you and I have reported, Gaurav, it's actually quite the opposite, because China also feels entrenched and stuck. They need a way out of this situation as well. They need a way to actually disengage and move back without looking like they've lost something. And therefore, this requires very tactful navigation, a very concerted diplomatic engagement. And I think that's where Dr. S. Jaishankar, who, as you've reported, and you know him better, Gaurav, has had a long stint as far as China is concerned. He's been India's ambassador there as well. He, holds many cards to how this very difficult situation can be navigated going forward. So this meeting between the Indian and Chinese ministers, is heavy with meaning, heavy with expectation, but there also is a great deal of realism, infused in this, because anyone covering China knows nothing happens overnight. It's going to be the long haul.
You're absolutely right, Shiv. And the fact that you mentioned, and that's very interesting, there is no chest thumping from the Indian side, specifically on some of those aspects that you've just raised, that there are a couple of sectors where India holds a couple of aces, but there is no conversation about that. Perhaps the effort is quite dialing down of tensions on both sides, without giving in to the other. There is no compromising national interest. That's the point that seems to be made. Challenges to bilateral relationship. The discussions were focused on addressing current challenges to bilateral relationships, especially peace and tranquility in border areas. And that, Shiv, has been India's bottom line, that this relationship can now only move forward if there is peace along the India-China line of actual control, and not what China says. Let those tensions be left for the future generation. Let's move forward on other aspects. India says that's not possible.
Not possible at all. I mean, India has put its foot down right from the start. There have been many diversionary tactics. China has tried to engage India, in a large series of military level talks. There was a proposal for, military commander level talks as well, which didn't happen because India has basically said for this tactical situation in Eastern Ladakh, the corps commander level talks is more than enough. The theatre commander level talks is more than enough. But any other engagement needs to be at the politico-diplomatic level. And that's what's happening here at the G20 foreign ministers meet, Gaurav. But going forward, I think the interesting thing to see right now, Gaurav, is to see whether the meeting between the Chinese minister and the Indian foreign minister, triggers a path ahead, what those next steps are, because those have been, tantalizingly missing. The clarity on what the path ahead is going to be between the two sides is precisely what has been missing for the last 3 years. So hopefully these two ministers will be able to, throw some light on how these two countries are going to take forward this handshake and make it more meaningful in such a way that in the foreseeable future, it can hopefully reflect on the ground.
Shiv, keep tracking that story. I will come back to you for more. Peace and tranquility at the borders essential to move forward. That was discussed. Shiv Arur there with the latest on what Dr. S. Jaishankar just tweeted out. We're slipping into a quick break. Back with lots more. Stay with us here on India Today.
You are watching India Today.
You have seen Iron Man Tony Stark wear it to reach war zones. You have seen Shah Rukh Khan and John Abraham wage a war in the sky wearing these. Jetpack suits are now going to be part of military drills and rescue operations. The Indian Army will soon adopt jetpack technology. These suits will be used for enhanced tactical mobility on line of actual control amid border tensions with China. The Indian Aerospace Defence News shared a demo on Twitter of its jetpack flying over a water body, buildings and fields. Soldiers will be able to fly 10 to 15 meters in the air by wearing this suit powered by a gas turbine engine. They can clock a speed of 50 km per hour. Jetpacks were the center of attraction at the Aero India 2023 held recently.
अगर टेक्नोलॉजी के बारे में बात करेंगे, ये पूरा टर्बोजेट इंजन से चलता है. इसका डीजल फ्यूल है. हमने डीजल इसलिए चूज किया कि डीजल का जो फ्लैश पॉइंट एंड फायर पॉइंट है वो नॉर्मल एविएशन फ्यूल से काफी आगे है.
Jetpacks are being tested by armed forces across the world. These videos from the UK highlight the features of the technology. In the first video, one can see how a soldier lands on the deck and drops a ladder over the side for the rest of the team to climb up on. In the second, the soldier demonstrates the ability to quickly zip back and forth between the ship and the raft. And in the third, 3 jet suit jockeys land on the deck of a ship successfully. jet suits are soon going to change the way wars are fought. Bureau Report, India Today.
Foreign ministers of the world's most powerful nations are assembling in New Delhi for a G20 meet under the cloud of the raging war in Ukraine, and the divide appears far too big to be bridged. At one end of the table are the Western nations led by the US, and at the other end, Russia backed by China. The hosts, India, will be walking the tightrope. What will be on Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar's mind is the failure at the G20 finance ministers meet in Bengaluru recently, when the group could not agree on a joint communique.
I don't think it would be really correct for me to prejudge the outcome of the G20 foreign ministers meeting. I think we should let the plenipotentiaries of the G20 foreign ministries meeting decide that on their own. For us, the questions relating to the food, energy and the fertilizer security, the impact that the conflict has on these economic challenges that we face.
How tough the task could be is evident from two statements issued by the UK and Russia. While London has said Foreign Secretary James Cleverly will call out Russian aggression in Ukraine at the meeting, Moscow says the actions of the West have put the world on the brink of a disaster. Now consider this. Two of the key players, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, have not met in person since the Ukraine war started. And the two sides have hardened their stance over the last few weeks. US President Joe Biden visited Ukraine on February 20th, declaring unwavering support to Volodymyr Zelensky.
And just today, that announcement includes artillery ammunition for HIMARS and howitzers, more javelins, anti-armor systems, air surveillance radars to help protect Ukrainian people from aerial bombardments. Later this week, we will announce additional sanctions against elites and companies that are trying to evade sanctions and backfill Russia's war machine.
Russian President Vladimir Putin hit back with a nuclear threat.
Make your media plan smarter with India Today Live TV on your connected devices. Amplify your brand with 100 million smart internet viewers. To advertise, mail us at sales@aajtak.com.
You are watching India Today.
Thanks for tuning in to India Today's non-stop coverage on a massive news day in the country, from elections to the big G20 to everything in between. We're going to get you all those big stories with me coming up over the next couple of hours. First, the headlines. India-China discussed the Ladakh border standoff in the first big high-level diplomatic engagement between the foreign ministers of both countries at the ongoing G20 Foreign Ministers Summit. Clear edge for BJP in Tripura. BJP leads in 34 seats. Left and Congress lead in 14. And Tipra Mota leads in 11. Modi's victory lap begins 7 p.m. in Delhi. BJP NDPP near the two-thirds majority mark in Nagaland. BJP hopes to form government in Meghalaya amidst a split verdict with the NPP. Supreme Court orders SEBI probe into the Adani Hindenburg case on the issue of manipulation of stock prices. Says the SEBI has to report to an expert committee within 2 months with its report. Supreme Court also hands down a verdict on the appointment of Central Election Commissioner and election commissioners. Says, just like the appointment of the CBI chief, new rules in the appointment mean that the Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition and Chief Justice of India will decide who the CEC will be. Bulldozers roll into Prayagraj for the second straight day. Another house linked to Umesh Pal murder razed to the ground. The house belongs to gangster-turned-neta Atiq Ahmed's aide, Saftar Ali. India's External Affairs Minister has just tweeted on the sidelines of the bilateral meeting between him and his Chinese counterpart, the first bilateral meet between India and China since the Ladakh standoff began in 2020. This is a big India Today news break because we've got the inside details of what's happening at this India-China bilateral. Remember, Dr. S. Jaishankar, the Indian Foreign Minister, has just tweeted, met Foreign Minister Qin Gang on the sidelines of the G20 Foreign Ministers meet this afternoon. Our discussions were focused on addressing current challenges to the bilateral relationship, especially peace and tranquility in the border areas. We also spoke about the G20 agenda. One simple little paragraph put out by Dr. S. Jaishankar, which only broadly tells you about what the contents of that conversation were, but very, very tellingly and on expected lines, as India Today has been reporting, that the discussions have been focused on addressing the current challenges to the bilateral relationship, and there is no bigger challenge to the bilateral relationship than the border issue centered around the standoff in eastern Ladakh. So the two ministers have indeed gone into the big gorilla in the room, that is the standoff between the world's two largest standing armies in eastern Ladakh. It's a standoff that began in 2020 and rapidly has become the largest military standoff on earth. Thousands of soldiers on both sides, arms and ammunition on both sides, massed at each other in the icy hellscape of eastern Ladakh is now the topic of conversation between the foreign ministers of India and China on the sidelines of the G20 foreign ministers meet. Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and Qin Gang of China, the new foreign minister of China, shaking hands there and then getting into the difficult and challenging subject matter of a relationship that has, by all accounts, touched rock bottom in the last few years.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is speaking. Let's listen in.
Обеспечением продовольственной безопасности, энергетической безопасности, реформы Всемирной торговой организации. Все это очень полезные и правильные договоренности. К сожалению, декларацию от имени всех министров группы 20 не удалось. Наши западные коллеги, как и год назад при индонезийском председательстве, добивались всеми правдами и неправдами, прежде всего неправдами и различными риторическими заявлениями, выдвинуть на передний план проблему ситуации вокруг Украины, которую они, конечно же, подают под соусом так называемой российской агрессии. Ничего хорошего это не принесло. Дискуссия, по крайней мере, в части выступлений западных делегаций, прежде всего стран «семерки», сбивалась на эмоциональные заявления. И все это, конечно, делалось в ущерб нормальному обсуждению тех проблем, которые реально стоят на повестке дня группы 20. В итоге принять итоговый документ от имени всех министров не получилось, как я уже сказал. Если быть конкретным, Запад настаивал на воспроизведении текста по ситуации вокруг Украины, который был согласован на саммите «двадцатки» в прошлом году на Бали, игнорируя полностью наши аргументы о том, что с тех пор произошло немало событий, включая чистосердечные признания госпожи Меркель, господина Олланда, господина Порошенко, да и самого Зеленского, что никто из них не собирался выполнять Минские договоренности, и целью подписания Минских соглашений с точки зрения западных интересов было выиграть время для того, чтобы накачивать Украину оружием ее к войне против Российской Федерации. Категорически отказывались упоминать этот факт, который общеизвестен и с которым спорить просто нормальному человеку невозможно. Также отказывались они в этом контексте принять еще один факт, который отражает произошедшее.
Okay, apologies for that. We're just going to get that English translation for our viewers in just a moment. That was Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, who is speaking. We'll get back to that audio once we have the English translation live. There is a feed. I'm going to tap into that so our viewers don't miss what the Russian foreign minister is saying. But remember, Sergei Lavrov is one of the most important members of the foreign ministers' meet of the G20. Because remember, the overwhelming subject matter under discussion at the G20 foreign ministers meet is going to be the Russia-Ukraine war. And Sergei Lavrov has come out all guns blazing. He's already apologized to India in a very ironic way, apologizing on behalf of the Western delegations, some of which gave India's foreign minister's dinner last night a miss ahead of the G20. The knives are out. There is a great deal of there's a great deal of hostility in the air with Lavrov and, the delegations of the Western countries, the UK, the US and others, all being in the same room at this time. And at a time when the world is looking to India to play a calming influence, between Russia and the other side. So Lavrov is in no mood to pull any punches, and he's come out with a very, very aggressive attack on the Western countries at the G20 here in Delhi. I'm going to go across to India Today's Akshay Dongre in just a minute, but I want to also bring in Geeta Mohan, our Foreign Affairs editor, who will be joining us in just a moment. But Lavrov has basically set the agenda by saying, I apologize to India for the behavior of Western diplomats. So if anyone was expecting a kind of sober start to Russia and the other, and the Western foreign minister delegations, taking it easy, breathing easy during the foreign ministers meet here in India, you can perish that thought. Lavrov has taken the first shot at those Western delegations and has, in a grand and ironic gesture, apologized on their behalf. Let's just listen in. Let's go back to that press conference.
The number of countries who would like to join such groupings as BRICS and SCO has increased over 2022. Does it mean that such groupings will be a counterbalance for the West? We have never approached participation in the international fora as a task to build a team, an alliance against someone. What we need is a balance of interests, and it is only ensured when there is a mutually respectful dialogue, when every country seeks not only to promote its positions, but also to do it in a way that the partners' positions are reflected. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS are both based on exactly these principles of equality, mutual respect and mutual trust, and the principle of consensus. The G20 was actually established in order to address economic and financial issues that the international community faced quite a long time ago. The first meeting of G20 at the level of ministers of finance and heads of central banks were held back in 1999, and in 2008, when another wave of global economic crisis broke out, it was decided to hold these discussions on financial issues at the level of heads of states and governments. That was when everyone agreed that G20 doesn't deal with geopolitical issues that are on the UN agenda, and primarily it's the Security Council and the General Assembly. And now G20 is a platform that unites the G7 countries, the leading countries of the West, the BRICS countries, the whole five, and a whole number of countries that, in terms of their approach, positions and interests, are closer to the BRICS position. Nonetheless, it is a platform for effective dialogue, for negotiating approach, as it used to be till the last year, when the West sacrificed to its ambitions on Ukrainian affairs all areas, all tracks of work that should be at the cornerstone of the G20. And now, I mentioned it in my speech at G20, all multilateral institutions are going through a test whether or not they reflect the current geopolitical realities. This goes for the UN, for G20, and whether or not they are relevant in the new conditions, it will be able to say so only those countries will be relevant who can do something else but present their claims in order to justify their right for hegemony. TV channel. Good afternoon, distinguished Minister. You've had lots of meetings and consultations. Do tell us, what has G20 shown, demonstrated in terms of non-Western countries? What are they going to do in a situation when the West formulates their situation the following way: either you are with us or against us? For the sustainability of the world order, what does it mean? Well,
концентрируемся на практической работе по обеспечению наших интересов, полностью сознавая, подчеркну это еще раз, что делать это необходимо с учетом законных интересов других участников процесса. И мы к этому готовы. Но насколько Запад осознает тупиковость своей нынешней линии, а они ведь заявляют, что необходимо нанести
that allegedly it is an existential problem for the West. They stated explicitly, they don't conceal it. They would like the attempt to preserve their hegemony on world arena. The developing countries do realize that they see it, they are aware of it, but some of them
конкретное давление с использованием приемов.
They are getting sucker punched against, so to say. And in their statements, in one way or another, they have to make certain statements, certain claims. They speak about how they adhere to the main principles of the UN Charter. They speak about the territorial integrity. They speak about the respect for sovereignty. We also agree with this. We also support this. But I would like to remind you that the UN Charter, like any document that was adopted by the entire global community, cannot be executed randomly. It's not many that you can pick items from. And like I said, in the UN Charter, it is enshrined, and it even concentrates upon this principle, the principle of the right of the peoples to self-determination. And since the very beginning of the UN, its member states paid attention that the principle of the sovereignty and territorial integrity and this principle of the right of the peoples for self-determination, it has to be somehow interpreted, and the process was launched where all the countries participated, which ended with the adoption of the Declaration on the Principles of Interstate Relations based on the United Nations Charter. This document has never refuted, has never cancelled since then, and there the interaction between these two principles is interpreted in the following way. Every state must adhere to the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity of any other state. It represents the entire nation that lives there.
Не отражают интересов ни крымчан, ни жителей Востока Украины.
It is obvious that the government does not represent the interests of the people in Crimea or in Donbass. I think everyone understands this perfectly. There is no need to delve into it any further.
Geeta Mohan from India Today. Minister Lavrov just wanted to know whether if there's going to be a joint communique. Was there a discussion on that? And why did Russia, including China, move back from the Bali Declaration? Also, you mentioned that the G20 forum has become a farce, apologized to India for the behavior of the West. What transpired in that room?
It's an interesting expression. Why Russia, including China? Что касается причин, по которым не состоялось принятие декларации.
As for the reasons why the declaration was not adopted, and instead of this, Indian presidency will outline their vision of the discussion as some kind of a summary by the president. I have just explained it in a lot of detail in your question, why the formula, the same formula that was put into the Bali Declaration. I also touched upon this. The summit on Bali took place more than 6 months ago, and since then a lot of things have happened that show what is going on in Ukraine, including the admission of guilt, basically, of 3 signatories of the Minsk Accords. And via Ms. Merkel, via Mr. Hollande and Mr. Poroshenko, they were directly stating that they were never going to implement these accords. And the accords, I would like to remind you, concerned including the provision of unalienable rights, human rights, in particular the rights of the Russian-speaking population to speak their native language, to teach their children in Russian. All this was not just undermined, but it was banned by law. The decision the Ukrainian parliament adopted, the decrees that the Ukrainian president signed that went for the education in Russia, the media that worked in Russian in regards to the Russian literature and Russian culture on a general level, and many other things. Today on the sidelines, I talked to my Western counterparts. I wanted to draw their attention to this, and they're looking at you without blinking, but they are not saying anything in response. The only position they have, why Russia has allowed the invasion, and they all emphasize that it was unprovoked. This invasion reflects the reaction to the war that the West was preparing for many years, and that's why it was arming the Ukrainian regime. And I would like to remind you that they took power as a result of armed coup d'etat. So the Bali formula, that a thing of the last year, of the past, a lot of things became clearer, not only to us, because we knew about it since long, but to all those who really want to investigate what's going on. Mr. Lavrov, European media published the results of a poll, and it says that the global South sees Russia as a partner and ally, which came as a surprise for the West. When do you think this strict division happened between the countries of the Golden Billion, so to say, and the rest? And isn't it the reason the Western leaders and diplomats are now traveling to, for example, Blinken went to the Central Asia, and Macron went to Africa, Scholz went to India? They go there to convince this country to join the sanctions, or it is a more global matter? If we speak about history, the ancestor of this Golden Billion is the colonial powers that were seizing the territories, conquering the territories on various continents, and they were imposing their order, their policies to exploit their natural resources, their human resources, and largely to live at their expense. And now, our Western counterparts, when more than 50 years, well, even more than that, it's been since the decolonization was over, but it's not finalized yet, it's not completed yet, because there is a resolution of the General Assembly regarding the that there are still French colonies, British colonies that violate the decisions of the General Assembly, and we also continue to work. In this regard, we will try to make sure that the UN decisions are implemented. Unfortunately, the West did not drop its neo-colonial habits, its neo-colonial aspirations, everything that is being done now to subdue the global economy, to make it work for the interests of the West. It's a neo-colonial instincts, neo-colonial practices. These are sanctions. Many members of the G20, many developing countries were talking about as being harmful for the global economy, for food security, for energy security. And I'm talking about the attempts to manipulate the prices on the global markets. For example, introducing so-called price cap for oil is basically stealing someone else's natural resources, if we see it for what it is. Manipulating the rules of the global trade, including the norms and regulations that are still existing within the World Trade Organization, and many other things as well. Yes, we can see that the West is continuing with other ways under new conditions. They are still promoting their interests without considering the interests of the vast majority of other stakeholders of the global community, and the developing countries can see it for what it is. I have already touched upon this matter, the colossal, boorish, immoral pressure. Yes, some of them, when such pressure is exerted against them, they are saying certain things, or they're voting in certain manner to relieve themselves a little bit from the pressure from the United States and their allies. But almost no developing country, maybe one or two of them, made certain decisions almost none of them joined the sanctions against the Russian Federation because they are perfectly aware what is going on here, what kind of game the West is playing, and they understand that it's not about Ukraine. But the thing is that our Western counterparts want to prove to them that it's still up to them to make any kind of a decision, and the threats that are now being voiced against the Chinese People's Republic. Sometimes I wonder, are they sane, these people who are posing these threats? You cannot threat to anyone, but when you threat China under current conditions, I really can't wrap my mind around it. If we speak about the manners, well, our Western counterparts have gotten really bad with this, so they are not thinking about diplomacy anymore. They are now only deal in blackmailing and threatening everyone else.
And please
this is Srinjoy Chaudhary.
Excuse me, and please use the second mic for interpreters.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Lavrov, this is Srinjoy Chaudhary of Times Now Network. My question is, this war this has gone on for 1 year. If you're looking at a settlement, if you want peace, would you want India to be involved in the settlement? Do you want Prime Minister Narendra Modi to be involved in the process?
Мы имеем отношения с Индией, которые...
The relations we have with India can be described as the privileged strategic partnership, and they're described as such in the documents that we have signed. And these are not just words. This formula reflects the special character of our relations, starting with India's independence and up until today. That's the nature of our relations, and we appreciate highly the responsible and worthy of a great power stance that India is taking globally on all the key matters of the global agenda. And today, when addressing the participants of the foreign minister meeting, President Modi, I think he presented balanced and responsible position of the country as the president of the G20. And in this address, he was not just speaking about some isolated individual situations, because the West is trying to divide the geopolitical picture into individual episodes. But in the address by Mr. Modi, he gave the assessment of the situation across the globe in general terms, and I completely share it. I think it has already been published, so you can familiarize yourselves with it. As for the assistance in resolving the crisis, on many occasions we have publicly stated that we have never refused to listen to serious suggestions that are made out of the sincere willingness to find a political resolution. One more time, I would like to remind you, when we are called to start negotiations, I do not remember anyone from the Western colleagues or from anyone else from any other countries talk to Ukraine to call them upon them to start negotiations. And I think there is a certain sad truth about this, because Ukraine is encouraged to continue war when Ukraine was ready to be engaged in negotiations last March, and when Ukraine suggested principles on how the situation could be resolved that we have supported, and we were ready to sign an agreement based on these principles, Ukraine was slapped on their wrists. Everyone knows this. The United States, the United Kingdom, a number of other actors from the European Union. And from what I understand, they told the Kiev regime, if Russians are ready to sign an agreement on resolving the situation, it means that we need to drag it out, that we need to make them weaker to achieve the victory on the battlefield, to defeat them on the battlefield, to achieve the strategic defeat of Russia. Listen to what the foreign ministers from Germany or what Josep Borrell said, the top diplomat from the European Union. No negotiations before Ukraine has advantage on the battlefield. So, to call upon Russia to start negotiations, which we have never refused to have if they are in earnest, I think that's not the right thing to do. And since last March, we have not seen anything in earnest. There is only military rhetoric, belligerent decisions made in NATO, and finally, everyone seems to be forgetting, and I mean journalists as well. None of the journalists in the West and in a number of developing countries somehow does not remember that last September, Mr. Zelensky, the head of the Kiev regime, signed a decree. And this decree forbids any kind of negotiations with the Russian government. We've been explaining this several times a day when we answer similar questions, but somehow it remains unnoticed by our colleagues from the media, from the foreign media, and they keep on asking why won't...
Dr. S. Jaishankar, the Indian External Affairs Minister, is speaking now at the G20 Foreign Ministers meet. Let's listen in.
Good evening to all of you. The Indian presidency today hosted the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting, and I was privileged to chair two very productive sessions which are covering various dimensions of international cooperation. The second session is in fact still going on. It's at its concluding period. Now, we saw participation from all the G20 countries and the 9 guest countries. There were 13 international organizations that were represented at the meeting. We had the presence of foreign ministers of 27 countries, apart from India, the chair. And 2 countries, the Republic of Korea and Japan, were represented at the Vice Minister, the Minister of State level. Which I believe is actually the largest gathering of foreign ministers hosted by the G20 presidency. Now, in the morning, we were addressed by the Prime Minister virtually, and I think some of that is on public, actually that is on public record, right? And for those of you who may not have seen it, he gave us some pretty forthright advice and I would say strong guidance on what the foreign ministers should do at the meeting. If I were to sum up what the Prime Minister told us, there were 5, to my mind, important points. One, he noted that multilateralism is in a crisis today, and in terms of preventing future wars and fostering international cooperation, which were its 2 primary tasks, it had failed. The second point he had made was that it was important to give a voice to the global south because the world was seeing a lot of countries actually regressing on their sustainable development goals pathway. We were witnessing unsustainable debt. These were countries who were most affected by global warming, and therefore it was particularly important to hear them. The third point he made was that the discussions, which we were just beginning at that time, he recognized that these discussions were affected by the geopolitical tensions of the day. But he asked us all as foreign ministers to remember that we had a responsibility for those who were not in the room. And therefore, he urged that we draw inspiration from India's civilizational ethos and focus not on what divides us, but on what unites us. He then spoke about the challenges that we should address, which included, of course, the impact of the pandemic, the lives lost in natural disasters, the breakdown of global supply chains, debt and financial crisis, challenges of resilience in healthcare systems, in infrastructure, in economies. And finally, he asked us as foreign ministers to trust in our collective wisdom and ability, and to rise above our differences. So I mentioned this at some length because this was very much the spirit in which we approached the discussions today. Now, we had two sessions really of meetings, and the topics range from strengthening multilateralism, ensuring food and energy security, development cooperation, and the second session was on counterterrorism, global skill mapping, humanitarian assistance and disaster response, as well as women-led development. Now, the G20 ministers, after the discussions today and the negotiations which preceded it, we have agreed to issue a common position where the G20 as a group has come together and arrived at a consensus on many important issues. So this has been adopted this afternoon as a chair's summary and outcome document. This would hold us in good stead as we move forward with other working group meetings of the presidency and, of course, in preparation for the summit which would take place in September. Now, what I'd like to do is really share some of the key takeaways from the outcome document and our discussions. These include, one, of course, the strong sentiment with G20 countries expressed on the need to strengthen multilateralism in the context of the dramatic changes in the global order. The G20 recognized in the context of the UN the essentiality of reforms and the need for reinvigorated multilateralism. Two, the important principles of international development cooperation, such as host country ownership, equal partnerships, tailoring such cooperation efforts with local needs. These were some aspects highlighted by the G20. They also touched upon the need for MDBs, the multilateral development banks, to mobilize additional financing and welcomed efforts to provide additional financing for sustainable development goals. The outcome document also stresses upon the need to have reliable food and fertilizer supply chains, as well as resilient and sustainable energy supply chains. In the context of global food and energy insecurity, this, we believe, is a very important message. I would also like to highlight that the foreign ministers unequivocally condemned terrorism in all forms and manifestations and recognized that all acts of terrorism are criminal and unjustifiable. They called for strengthening of efforts to deny safe havens to terrorist groups, freedom of operations, movement and recruitment, as well as financial, material or political support. The G20 also reflected upon the threats arising from the misuse of new and emerging technologies and highlighted the importance of strengthening international cooperation in that regard. For the first time, the G20 foreign ministers considered and discussed the topic of counter-narcotics and called for inclusive and strong international cooperation in this regard. They also discussed the topic of global skills mapping, and this was in the context of the changing nature of work. They recognized that well-integrated, skilled workers benefit not only in their country of origin, but also the destination country where they may happen to be employed. The G20 also accepted the need to strengthen international cooperation in the field of humanitarian assistance and disaster risk reduction. This will be further discussed in the working group on this particular subject, which has been newly set up by the Indian presidency. Now, as you all know, women-led development is one of the key priorities of the Indian presidency, and it has been personally highlighted by the Prime Minister. After due deliberations on the G20 table, the foreign ministers affirmed the need to put gender equality and empowerment of women and girls, including their leadership, at the core of our efforts for inclusive recovery. Important discussions on global health were also held. The statement, the outcome document I'm talking about, highlights the need for strengthening key aspects of global health architecture, support for the pandemic fund, and continued political attention to global health. It stresses the need for implementing the One Health approach. The foreign ministers addressed climate action in the context of common but differentiated responsibilities and urged developed countries to fulfill their commitments to deliver on the goal of jointly mobilizing $100 billion per year urgently and through to 2025 to tackle climate change. Now, despite the challenges of the divergent positions on the conflict in Ukraine, the G20 foreign ministers were able to come to a consensus on addressing these key challenges that I have just mentioned. As the Prime Minister urged, we did indeed focus more on what unites us than what divides us. You would also see that it has been our endeavor to ensure that the voice of the Global South is heard on the G20 table. And that is why India had organized the Voice of the Global South Summit in January this year, in which I think 125 countries participated. So the agenda for the foreign ministers meeting, as well as the outcome document, has very clearly taken forward the priorities of the Global South. We are also particularly glad that to see so many of our friends and partners from the Global South on the table, because India, as President, had invited them. I would also like to point out that today's sessions commenced with a moment of silence to pay respect to those who lost their lives in the recent earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. Ahead of our deliberations in today's first session, as I told you, the Prime Minister gave his virtual address to the foreign ministers. I would like to take this opportunity to express my appreciation to all G20 members, to all the participating delegations, obviously to our own team working on it, for the support which they have given to the priorities of the presidency, for the efficient holding of today's meeting. We believe that the outcome document is truly a reflection of G20's commitment to face global challenges squarely and collectively. The G20 foreign ministers, along with the ministers from the guest countries and heads of delegations from international organizations, will be calling upon the Prime Minister very shortly, in fact, immediately after this press conference. So this really, in summary, is a sense of what was discussed today, what was negotiated amongst the G20 members, and the chair's summary and outcome document will, of course, be released in due course. So I think, Arindam, that should pave the way for questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for a detailed and comprehensive perspective, sir. Some ground rules before I open the floor for questions. Please introduce yourself and the organization that you represent. Please note, we will try to limit questions to one per organization outlet. We will also be grouping questions. And finally, we have a very hard cut on time, as Honorable Minister mentioned. He has to go somewhere, so please don't be disappointed. Let me start with a few hands here. 1 second. I saw the hand up there first. Sudhi, why don't you start?
Sir, Shruti Ranjan from Bloomberg. So if you could give us an understanding as to why the foreign ministers could not come to a consensus. We know India was trying very hard to convince everybody, in fact China and Russia, to kind of agree on this. Where did the hurdle come up? If you could give us an understanding. Thank you.
Okay. Ma'am, here on the right.
Thank you. Barbara Platt-Usher from the BBC. The Russians issued a statement after a meeting between China and Russia on the sidelines, of the event in which they criticized the West for employing blackmail and threats and interfering in the internal affairs of other countries. And I was wondering whether that had any impact on your efforts to come to a joint communique, or I know you've highlighted that you were able to deal with the issues you wanted to find consensus on, but to what degree did that affect the discussions? And to just clarify that a chair summary is not a joint communique, and whether you felt that you fell short of your expectations in terms of what you might have been able to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you. Right here. Yes.
Sir, Rishikesh from PTI. My question is the Russia-Ukraine conflict potentially derailing aspirations of global South under India's presidency, sir, and especially India's concerns about Indo-Pacific region, Chinese aggression
Sorry,
in the
could
Indo-Pacific
you
region.
clarify your question? Sorry.
My question is,
You got it. Okay, fair enough. Siddhant, go ahead.
Sir, Siddhant from WION. Sir, do you think that Siddhant from WION, my question is, do you think the Russia-Ukraine conflict is potentially paralyzing the grouping because of the divide between Russia and the West? And my second question, what was your meeting with the Chinese foreign minister?
The first question has already been asked. I'll take that as second one. Sir, to you.
Okay. In a sense, the first three questions cover a very similar area, so I'm really clubbing it together. I'll ignore your first question because you're allowed only one. So I'll take the China question. What I tried to, the picture which I was sharing with you was the G20 delegations, the members, the negotiators, the ministers. We met, we discussed, the officials also obviously negotiated. Now, there were a very large number of issues on which there was agreement. And in fact, if you look at, the detailed picture that I have presented to you, there was agreement on various aspects of strengthening multilateralism, on promoting food and energy security, on climate change, climate action, ensuring biodiversity, on gender issues, on global health, on counter-terrorism, on new emerging technologies, counter-narcotics, how do we go about with development cooperation. So there are, I would say, I don't want to put a percentage on it because that's not a fair way of depicting, a collection of issues. But do appreciate that on the bulk of the issues which concern especially the global South, the developing countries, there was a considerable meeting of minds, and a considerable meeting of minds which has been captured by the outcome document. Now, the question, why was, did we fall short of expectations? Why is it called what it is? If we had had a perfect meeting of minds on all issues and captured it fully, then obviously it would have been a collective statement. But there were issues, and I think the issues, I would say, very frankly, concerned the Ukraine conflict, on which there were divergences. So on the bulk of the issues, we were able to get an outcome document. There was a chair summary because there were differences on the Ukraine issue which we could not reconcile between various parties who held differing positions. Now, is the conflict impacting the global South? Of course it is. It's not something new. In fact, India has been saying this very strongly for pretty much close to a year, that this is affecting. In fact, today in my own session, I actually used the word saying for much of the global South, this is a make or break issue. That the costs of fuel, the cost of food, the cost of fertilizer, the availability of fertilizer, which means next year's food, these are all extremely pressing issues. And if you see some of the some of the countries who were already struggling with debt, who were already impacted by the pandemic. For them, this conflict, the knock-on effects of this conflict coming on top of that has been really, damaging is a very, very mild word. So it is a matter of very, very deep concern for us, which is why we have kept the focus in this meeting very much on the concerns of the Global South. We feel these are the most vulnerable countries. It's not realistic, it's not credible to talk about the future of the global economy and the multilateral order if we are not able to really address and focus on the issues of those who are most in need. So that's been broadly the approach. So just to sum up, I would say in terms of the outcome document, which we will be putting out very, very shortly, you will see that, the bulk, there is, almost, I would say, 95% in terms of paragraph agreement. And it is just on 2 paragraphs that we were not able to get everybody on the same page or same para, as you might call it. On the China meeting, I met Minister Chingang on the sidelines of the conference this afternoon. It's our first meeting after he took over as foreign minister. So we spent, I don't know, maybe about 45 minutes talking to each other. And the bulk of our conversation, understandably, was about the current state of our relationship, which many of you have heard me describe as abnormal. And I think those were among the adjectives that I used in that meeting. We have, there are real problems in that relationship that need to be looked at, that need to be discussed very openly and candidly between us. That's what we sought to do today. We also had a brief discussion on what was happening in the G20 framework, but the thrust of the meeting was really on our bilateral relationship and the challenges in the bilateral relationship, especially that of peace and tranquility in the border areas.
Sorry, let me take another round of questions, if you have, sir.
Yeah, one more round.
Okay. There, yes, please. No, there, please.
Dr. Jaishankar, Mujib Bashar from the New York Times. Although the statement may have fallen short, as you said, because of divergent opinions, in the context of the role that India could play to bring the sides together on the Ukraine war, there are reports that Secretary Blinken and Sergei Lavrov may have met on the sidelines of G20. Are these the kind of positive efforts that did happen and India facilitate conversations like that to bridge the gap? Would you confirm that?
One second. Akhilesh, go ahead. Akhilesh, yeah, microphone.
Sir, I'm Akhilesh Sowan from Sansad TV. You told about global skill mapping and related issue. What do you mean by that, and how it was discussed, and what is the outcome on this?
I had one question there. Sorry, yeah, please, yeah. Yes, sir. No, not you, behind you.
Good afternoon. I'm Emerson Lim from Central News Agency of Taiwan. As most countries are focusing on Russia-Ukraine conflict, Taiwan Strait is also another flash point in this region. So, is the Taiwan Strait issue discussed during the meeting, and is the G20 ministers, or at least the Quad ministers, taking steps to prevent the tensions from escalating? Thank you.
Thank you. One more. Neeraj, last one.
सर, नीरज हूँ न्यूज 18 इंडिया से। हमारा सवाल यह है कि अभी 2 बैठकें हुई G20 वित्त मंत्रियों की और विदेश मंत्रियों की बैठक में कोई ज्वाइंट स्टेटमेंट नहीं आ पाया। बाली घोषणा पत्र में भारत की भूमिका अहम थी। प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी के शब्दों को इस्तेमाल किया गया और भारत की कोशिश से वो हो सका था कि बाली डिक्लेरेशन जारी हो सका। अब आने वाले महीनों में क्या कोशिश होगी कि समिट में एक ज्वाइंट डिक्लेरेशन आ सके, सभी लोगों के बीच यूक्रेन मसले पर सहमति बन सके?
थैंक यू सर।
Thank you. Look, I wouldn't put it the way you put it, that the statement fell short. I mean, there are in diplomacy occasions when you are able to get 20 countries to agree on everything. There are occasions when you don't. So, for me, the primary objective of this meeting and of our presidency was really to highlight what were the key problems facing the global economy, especially the problems faced by the more vulnerable economies of the world. Now, if you, as I said, and when you look at the outcome document, you will see this for yourself. The bulk of the issues which are concerning developing countries, I think they were very satisfactorily addressed. I mean, it's not like we can give instantaneous solutions, but I think the thinking, the policy prescriptions, the commitments, the mindset were all absolutely in the right direction. So, yes, on one particular issue, because of very polarized views of some countries, we were not able to bridge it on this particular occasion. Whereas, as our colleague pointed out from there, we were able to do that with, a number of us were able to do that collectively in Bali. But obviously, the Bali situation today, for whatever reason, some countries feel cannot be extrapolated. So I would urge you really to look on the fact that substantively on the key development issues of debt, issues of finance, issues of food, issues of fuel, issues of health, issues of climate. In fact, this meeting was able to get everybody around the table. And as I said, this is no easy task given the state of polarization in the world. On your question about global skills mapping, essentially today there is a growing demand in the developed world for skills and talents. There is a growing availability, but they are not necessarily in the developed world. Much of that availability is in the developing world. So how do you match the demand and supply for the benefit of the global economy? That is the really crucial issue. For a country like India, which has significant human resources, and which fortunately now has a government which pays attention to the development of those human resources, which actually focuses on skills and talent and innovation and education. This is an opportunity for us. So, especially in the last 9 years, we have also been looking at what are called mobility and migration partnership, which allow for legal mobility, which ensure that talent and skills which go out get the same treatment in those particular geographies as their own citizens, and which ensure that all of this is legal and free of any illegal activities. Now, it's not just India. I'm citing India because we are among the countries where, very active in this. But there are other countries as well. So this is widely recognized. In fact, in today's intervention, I'm not, I think the etiquette is that you don't specifically say what, individual ministers said. But I can tell you that some of the relevant international organizations and some of the other ministers there spoke at some length about the importance of how do you ensure, smooth mobility, how do you ensure protected mobility, legal mobility, because this is today one of the big issues before the international economy. On the Taiwan Straits issue, I think the answer is very simple. No, the matter was not discussed today. जो आपका जो सवाल है कि बाली में हम लोग जो हैं उस समय माने हमारे कारण ही नहीं, हम सब मिलके, हमारा योगदान तो था जरूर उसमें कि हम लोग उस समय वहाँ सहमति बना पाए। अब क्या हुआ है कि बाली के बाद अभी जो है दुनिया में काफ़ी कुछ घटनाएं हुई हैं। अब जो G20 के सदस्य जो हैं, जो इस मुद्दे के साथ जो जुड़े हुए हैं, उनके इस मामले में अलग अलग विचार हैं और हम जो है इस बार उनके विचार माने उनके बीच में इतना गैप था कि हम लोगों ने प्रयास तो की, पर प्रयास के बावजूद हम जो है इस समय सहमति बना नहीं पाए। तो आप देखेंगे कि जैसे हमने बेंगलोर में किया था वैसे ही जो बाली में जो तय हुआ है उसी को हमने दोहराया है और हमारी जो सोच है कि G20 के ज़्यादा सदस्य जो हैं वो अभी भी बाली के जो आउटकम जो था उसके साथ वो जुड़े हुए हैं। सो एसेंशियली ही आस्क्ड मी सेइंग he asked me saying that why were you not able to carry forward what happened in Bali, and I explained that given the state of polarization, given presumably developments which have happened since then, we found that positions were very far apart, and we tried very hard. We were not the only country who tried. The G20 works very, very collectively, but we were not able to bridge the gap. But I want to conclude by highlighting one very important point. In the past, for quite a few years now, G20 foreign ministers have met. This is the first time that the G20 foreign ministers have produced an outcome document. The outcome document, I think, reflects consensus and cooperation and collaboration on a very vast number of issues that are particularly important today for the international community, for the global south. So very frankly, I think it's a good day's work that we have done, and I'm very happy to share it with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you also, Foreign Secretary, sir, and Su Sherpa Abhay. Thank you all for joining us today. Good evening.
Okay, that was Dr. S. Jaishankar taking a small group of questions centered around the possibility of a joint consensus at the G20, which remains elusive right now, and also throwing light on that all-important bilateral meeting between himself and his Chinese counterpart that's just taken place a short while ago. The big focus in that meeting between the Indian and Chinese foreign ministers was, of course, on the border issue, peace and tranquility issues, the first bilateral since the Ladakh standoff began over 3 years ago. So the India-China standoff was the topic of discussion. Dr. S. Jaishankar has also said that the Ukraine issue has become a very, very polarizing issue, and it has hampered the possibility of consensus at the G20. He didn't say it, of course, in so many words, but that was the sense that the Indian External Affairs Minister was giving at this point of time. So the G20 moving into top gear. This evening we will see more statements coming out. That suspense remains over what kind of consensus, if any, will have been involved in the G20. Remember, today is only day 1, tomorrow is day 2. India stands as not only as the host of the G20, but in many ways is being seen as a potential calming influence for what is essentially a very, very broken and stricken and damaged world. You've got the two big the big ticket spectacle, moments from today's G20 meetings. You've got there Dr. S. Jaishankar meeting with Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, and Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State of the United States. Two countries that have been embroiled in a increasingly aggressive Cold War that's come to a flashpoint now in the battlefield of Ukraine. I want to go across to India today's Gaurav Sawant, who joins me live now. Gaurav, you heard what Dr. S. Jaishankar was saying just now. What stood out for you from what he was saying, Gaurav? That consensus, a joint communique at the G20, is that likely? Is work being done towards it? What's the sense that you got from the External Affairs Minister?
So the situation remains extremely grim, considering the fact that there are countries that are moving back from the position that they had reached, the consensus that reached in Bali, and that was where India had played a key role in arriving at that consensus that this is not an era of war. But countries like perhaps, as was the case in the finance ministers meet, China and Russia are moving back even from that position when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. India trying its best to ensure that all issues are given equal treatment, especially the issues that are raised by the global south or developing countries. India has been pushing for the sustainable development goals to be considered, reliability of supply chains, energy security, food security, security of movement, all of that extremely critical as far as developing economies are concerned. Climate goals, again, the West imposing undue costs on the developing countries, and we are seeing the impact of that. Now, these are some of the issues that India has been highlighting as a leader of the global south and using India's presidency of G20 to bring global focus on these issues. But some of the Western countries or the developed countries remain very focused on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Again, look at the ground realities, Shiv. That's not a war of India's making or global South's making, and yet there are costs that are being imposed, whether it's food prices or energy prices or supply chains, that the global South bears the cost of something that's being done by the global North at a time where India is making very clear there's only one way, which is peace, dialogue and negotiations.
Gaurav, what about the, he answered very briefly that, about the bilateral with the Chinese foreign minister. What did you pick up from that? He pretty much said what he tweeted as well, which is that the discussion centered around, the bilateral challenges, especially peace and tranquility in the border areas. Was there any indication from what he said, that there has been any kind of forward movement?
Well, there's a very firm stand that India has taken, and there's a reiteration of that stand. And that stand is for the relationship to move forward. Peace and tranquility at the borders is essential. That's the basic. And if you notice, from 2020 to 2023, India's stance has remained the same. For this relationship to move forward, China will have to restore the April-May 2020 situation. Now, we're still waiting for a readout of the Chinese side. Perhaps that'll come today, later tomorrow, maybe what the Chinese foreign ministry says, and we'll have a little more idea of what the Chinese thinking is. But there is no dilution of India's stand. Remember, Shiv, you and I have talked about this before. You and I have covered this on Ground Zero. It's the largest standoff between the armies of India and China that's on from April-May 2020 till now, and neither side willing to back down.
Okay, neither side willing to back down. Let's just quickly summarize for you what the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has just said. He said that an attempt was made to evolve consensus, but that hasn't happened at the G20 so far. Attempts are still, of course, being made. Today is day one. Tomorrow is day two of the foreign ministers' meet. But let me just read out exactly what our sources have told us pertaining to this particular story. It says, we spent about 45 minutes talking to each other. He's talking about his meeting with the foreign minister of China. He also says that the Ukraine conflict has been the main reason for no joint consensus or communique as part of the G20 foreign ministers meet so far. Take a look at the crucial soundbite from what the foreign minister just said.
I met Minister Chingang on the sidelines of the conference this afternoon. It's our first meeting after he took over as foreign minister. So we spent, maybe about 45 minutes talking to each other. There are real problems in that relationship that need to be looked at, that need to be discussed very openly and candidly between us. That's what we sought to do today. We also had a brief discussion on what was happening in the G20 framework, but the thrust of the meeting was really on our bilateral relationship and the challenges in the bilateral relationship, especially that of peace and tranquility in the border areas.
Okay, Gaurav continues to be with me. Gaurav, Dr. Jaishankar saying very clearly in no ambiguous terms that it is the Ukraine war that has been mainly responsible for the lack of any kind of consensus in the G20 foreign ministers meet so far. Today is day one, tomorrow is day two, Gaurav. Are we to understand that
the delegations, the teams are still trying to work something out? Because Lavrov came out all guns blazing today against the Western delegations.
Oh, he absolutely did. In fact, he hit out at some of the Western, leaders, given that some of them, according to him, boycotted or stayed away from the dinner. Some of them behaved, as he said, in a very difficult manner. But the effort, India's effort, has been to bring Russia and America at least on the talking table, on the dialogue table. And the External Affairs Minister responded to a question. There was some speculation that the Russian Foreign Minister and the American Secretary of State would be meeting separately away from cameras. He did respond that, well, there was some movement, but not in as many words. So India has been trying. Have we been successful as a nation? Maybe not completely at this stage, but the effort continues. Then again, Shiv, India's point is that one issue of Russia-Ukraine conflict, or something that Europe and America are focused on, should not derail G20 that talks about not just what's happening in the developed world, but the developing economies. It's the voice of the global south that must be heard. The issues that the developing economies face, whether it's food security or energy security, rising prices, climate challenges, all of these are issues that must be addressed, and they're equally important and cannot be held hostage to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And that's the point India has been repeatedly making. Unfortunately, European countries and America remain focused on trying to ostracize Russia or have other countries call out Russia for the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Shiv.
Gaurav, stay with me, because the Russia-Ukraine war, which Gaurav has covered, he was the first Indian journalist there last year once the invasion began, it remains, this whole year later, the biggest elephant in the room. It's the biggest world issue, and it's also the biggest elephant in the room at this ongoing G20 foreign ministers meet in India's national capital. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar held that bilateral with Sergei Lavrov earlier today. The Russian foreign minister, also well known as one of Russian President Vladimir Putin's right-hand men, was here, and he, like I said, began his public engagements by attacking all of the Western delegations and basically saying that they've been blackmailing other economies. In his briefing, Lavrov not only lauded India and Prime Minister Modi's role in governance as the Ukraine war shadow loomed across the globe, but continuing his tirade against the Western nations, Lavrov claimed that it was the West, especially the United States and the UK, that had derailed peace talks between Russia and Ukraine and had been amping up pressure to isolate Russia from the rest of the world. External Affairs Minister Jaishankar also addressed the global impact of the war that has been raging for over 12 months now. Jaishankar stated that while the G20 focused on strengthening multilateralism, the war's impact has largely affected the global south. And he very tellingly said, it is this war that has meant no joint communique, no joint consensus has been involved at the G20 so far.
Is the conflict impacting the global south? Of course it is. It's not something new. In fact, India has been saying this very strongly for pretty much close to a year, that this is affecting. In fact, today in my own session, I actually used the word saying, for much of the global south, this is a make or break issue. That the costs of fuel, the cost of food, the cost of fertilizer, the availability of fertilizer, which means next year's food, these are all extremely pressing issues. And if you see some of the countries who were already struggling with debt, who were already impacted by the pandemic, for them, this conflict, the knock-on effects of this conflict coming on top of that has been really, damaging is a very, very mild word. On one particular issue, because of very polarized views of some countries, we were not able to bridge it on this particular occasion. Whereas, as our colleague pointed out from there, we were able to do that with, a number of us were able to do that collectively in Bali. But obviously, the Bali situation today, for whatever reason, some countries feel cannot be extrapolated. In fact, this meeting was able to get everybody around the table. And as I said, this is no easy task given the state of polarization in the world.
Today, when addressing the participants of the foreign minister meeting, President Modi, I think he presented balanced and responsible position of the country as the president of the G20. And in this address, he was not just speaking about some isolated individual situations, because the West is trying to divide the geopolitical picture into individual episodes. But in the address by Mr. Modi, he gave the assessment of the situation across the globe.
Оценка общего состояния дел в мире, напомню в очередной раз.
When we are called to start negotiations, I do not remember anyone from the Western colleagues, anyone else from any other countries, talk to Ukraine to call them upon them to start negotiations, because Ukraine is encouraged to continue war. When Ukraine was ready to be engaged in negotiations last March, Ukraine was slapped on their wrists. Everyone knows this, the United States, the United Kingdom, and from what I understand, they told the Kiev regime, if Russians are ready to sign an agreement on resolving the situation, it means that we need to drag it out, that we need to make them weaker to achieve the victory on the battlefield, to defeat them on the battlefield, to achieve the strategic defeat of Russia.
Let's bring Gaurav back in on this. Gaurav, what does this say about what's going to happen next between Russia and Ukraine? Because you've got Lavrov pretty much pointing a direct finger at the US and UK and saying that any possibility of normalization of peace talks between Russia and Ukraine have been hampered deliberately by the UK and the United States.
Shiv, this has been Russia's case all throughout, that Russia is actually fighting the United States and NATO. Ukraine is just a tool in between. Peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, they couldn't move forward because America and the UK didn't want it, according to Sergei Lavrov. So that's one part of the story. The second part is that even President Putin pointed out how Europe and America continue to arm Ukraine, and that's actually prolonging the war, that's prolonging the pain that people are facing. The global effort should be to bring about a consensus, negotiated settlement, dialogue, and that is not happening. The war is actually being encouraged with more weapons being supplied to Ukraine. That's, of course, Russia's point of view. India's point of view constantly has been that India can play a role, but a settlement can only be found through dialogue. Hostilities need to stop. Dialogue is the way forward, and that is where the world needs to come together. But as External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar clearly pointed out, that the stance taken by the opposing sides are so diverse that it wasn't possible to bridge that gap today.
Gaurav, stay with me. Let's listen into what Prime Minister Modi said in his address earlier today to the G20 foreign ministers. Remember, this is how the summit today began. It's been a very dramatic day. Many things have been said. But here's what the Prime Minister said right at the start.
They are also the ones most affected by global warming caused by richer countries. This is why India's G20 presidency has tried to give a voice to the global south. No group can claim global leadership without listening to those most affected by its decisions. Excellencies, you are meeting at a time of deep global divisions. As Foreign Minister, it is but natural that your discussions are affected by the geopolitical tensions of the day. We all have our positions and our perspectives on how this tension should be resolved. We must also admit that the tragic consequences of this failure are being faced most of all by the developing countries. After years of progress, we are at risk today of moving back on the sustainable development goals. Many developing countries are struggling with unsustainable debt while trying to ensure food and energy security for their people. We have seen stable economies suddenly overwhelmed by debt and financial crisis. These experiences clearly show the need for resilience in our societies, in our economies, in our healthcare systems, and in our infrastructure. The G20 has a critical role to play in finding the right balance between growth and efficiency on one hand and resilience on the other. We can reach this balance more easily by working together. That is why your meeting is important. I have full trust in your collective wisdom and ability. I am sure that today's meeting will be ambitious, inclusive, action-oriented, and will rise above differences. Excellencies, we must all acknowledge that multilateralism is in crisis today. The architecture of global governance created after the Second World War was to serve two functions. First, to prevent future wars by balancing competing interests. Second, to foster international cooperation on issues of common interests. The experience of the last few years, financial crisis, climate change, pandemic, terrorism, and wars clearly shows that global governance has failed. At the leading economies of the world, we also have a responsibility toward those who are not in this room. The world looks upon the G20 to ease the challenges of growth, development, economic resilience, disaster resilience, financial stability, transnational crime, corruption, terrorism, and food and energy security. In all these areas, the G20 has capacity to build consensus and deliver concrete results. India has selected the theme of One Earth, One Family, One Future for its G20 presidency. It signals the need for unity of purpose and unity of action. I hope that your meeting today will reflect the spirit of coming together for achieving common and concrete objectives.
Let's go across to India Today's Akshay Dongre for more. Akshay, what does the rest of the day look like as far as the G20 is concerned? These very big bilaterals have just taken place. What next?
Well, Shiv, as far as the rest of the day is concerned, there is going to be a press conference by the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken.
Yeah.
So we have seen fireworks now coming from Sergei Lavrov, who accused the UK, the US, the entire West of sabotaging the outcomes of the G20, of how India would have expected it to be as far as the foreign ministers meet is concerned. In fact, Sergei Lavrov also apologized, according to our colleague Geeta Mohan, who has been reporting all day on this, that Sergei Lavrov also apologized on behalf of the West that this is not how the entire event should have been, how the outcome should have been. So now we can expect a fireback from Antony Blinken as far as the allegations by Russia is concerned. Yes, there were very important bilaterals as far as the joint commune, however, is concerned. The countries could not be brought to a consensus. Dr. S. Jaishankar, the foreign ministers, had just held a briefing right here where I'm standing right now. He also said that we tried really hard, and it's not just India that tried really hard. There are a lot of countries who tried to persuade, to bridge the gap between the West and the Russia and China, but there could not be a consensus. In fact, the Bali the document of the G20 has come, the consensus document has come, and there is a footnote there that all countries agree to the joint document except para 3 and 4, which is not acceptable by China and Russia. This is similar to what happened in Bengaluru, where during the finance ministers meet, a similar kind of thing happened when the G20 members tried to replicate the Bali Declaration. The para 3 and 4, which mentions war, which mentions Ukraine, which mentions aggression, they could not be accepted by China and Russia. Situations have changed. Yes, on the ground in Ukraine, there is a lot of pressure on Russia as far as this conflict is concerned.
Stay with me, Akshay. Let me just come back to you in just a moment. This, another big sort of Kodak moment at the G20, has been the meeting between the Prime Minister and the Italian Prime Minister as well. Many, many important images from the G20 have come to the fore. Some of those images have gone viral as well. This high-octane Raisina dialogue also scheduled today. It's India's flagship conference on geopolitics and geostrategy is also kicking off today. On the sidelines of that dialogue, Prime Minister Modi held talks with his Italian counterpart, Giorgia Meloni, at Hyderabad House. Prime Minister Modi hailed the India-Italy 75th anniversary of that bilateral relationship. The Italian Prime Minister lauded Prime Minister Modi for having the highest approval ratings in the world for a world leader. Both leaders vowed to strengthen bilateral ties and joined hands to begin defense cooperation as well.
एक और क्षेत्र है जो दोनों देश एक नया अध्याय शुरू कर रहे हैं और वो है रक्षा सहयोग का। भारत में डिफेंस मैन्युफैक्चरिंग सेक्टर में को प्रोडक्शन एंड को डेवलपमेंट के अवसर बन रहे हैं जो दोनों देशों के लिए लाभदायक हो सकते हैं। हमने दोनों देशों की सेनाओं के बीच नियमित रूप से जॉइंट एक्सरसाइज और ट्रेनिंग कोर्सेज आयोजित करने का भी निर्णय लिया। आतंकवाद और अलगाववाद के खिलाफ लड़ाई में भारत और इटली कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर चल रहे हैं। हमने इस सहयोग को और मजबूत करने पर विस्तार पूर्वक चर्चा की। एक और क्षेत्र है जो दोनों देश एक नया अध्याय शुरू कर रहे हैं और वो है रक्षा सहयोग का। भारत में डिफेंस मैन्युफैक्चरिंग सेक्टर में को प्रोडक्शन एंड को डेवलपमेंट के अवसर बन रहे हैं जो दोनों देशों के लिए लाभदायक हो सकते हैं। हमने दोनों देशों की सेनाओं के बीच नियमित रूप से जॉइंट एक्सरसाइज और ट्रेनिंग कोर्सेज आयोजित करने का भी निर्णय लिया। आतंकवाद और अलगाववाद के खिलाफ लड़ाई में भारत और इटली कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर चल रहे हैं। हमने इस सहयोग को और मजबूत करने पर विस्तार पूर्वक चर्चा की। यूक्रेन संघर्ष के शुरुआत से ही भारत ने यह स्पष्ट किया है कि इस विवाद को केवल डायलॉग और डिप्लोमेसी के जरिए ही सुलझाया जा सकता है और भारत किसी भी शांति प्रक्रिया में योगदान देने के लिए पूर्ण रूप से तैयार है।
I firmly believe that there's a lot that we can do together, and I'm not sure if this will lead me to the approval rate that the Prime Minister Modi has reached. I think is that the most loved one of all around the world. But I mean, this has really proven that he has been a major leader, and congratulations for that, Prime Minister. This is my first bilateral visit in this region ever since I took office, and we want to further boost this relation, and this is the reason why we have decided to turn our partnership in a strategic partnership, because we have a very solid relationship. There's a lot to be working on together, starting from some sectors where we want to enhance our cooperation. Let me mention defense, which was mentioned by the Prime Minister, and energy security. India has set up major objectives in this connection. Prime Minister Modi knows very well Italy's position, which is giving full support to the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and we both hope that India, having the presidency of the G20, may play a central role in facilitating a negotiating process for the cessation of hostilities for a just peace.
We've got some breaking news coming in that the Quad meet of the 4 foreign ministers of the Quad alliance of India, the United States, Japan and Australia will be meeting on the 3rd of March. That's the breaking story that I'm bringing to you right now. I want to go across to India today's Akshay Dongre, who's with me live on this story. Akshay, big Quad meet on the 3rd of March. India, Australia, the United States, Japan, the foreign ministers of these 4 countries will be meeting right after the G20 foreign ministers meet.
Well, absolutely, Shiv, and this is going to be a big meeting because it's happening at the sidelines of India's Raisina dialogue that is taking place right now. But when we are talking about the 4 foreign ministers that will be taking part, it is noteworthy to mention here that even the Japanese foreign minister will be taking part in this particular meeting, because he was not present here today. As far as the G20 foreign ministers meeting is concerned. But the major news point here is that how is it going to impact the coalition here? Because when we are talking about the Quad Leader Summit that took place earlier, we saw that when Prime Minister Narendra Modi, when he was in Japan, we saw that Russia and Japan and China conducted, there was an air exercise that was very close to Japanese water, which is very clear that China and Russia are urged by the Quad. So how exactly are they going to respond to this meeting that is taking just after the G20 summit? That is a big question, but certainly it is not going to go down well with China at least. And when it comes to Russia as well, Russia has also been dismissive of the efforts, especially by Japan and the US. In terms of trying to forge closer ties with India, which it also considers a very, very traditional ally. There will be a meeting.
China has been very dismissive of the Quad. It's going to be interesting to see, what reaction comes in from China, because, obviously a Quad meeting of the 4 foreign ministers of India, the US, Japan and Australia was always going to be on the cards, on the sidelines of this geopolitical, event here in the national capital of India. Gaurav, what would you say about this Quad meeting happening at this time?
Shiv, this is a very important grouping, and this grouping, even though Japan's deputy foreign minister is here, not the foreign minister, but this grouping remains extremely important, and China keeps a hawk eye. It does feel very threatened by this grouping, especially as you and Akshay have been reporting on the freedom of navigation patrols that have been carried out including in South and East China Sea by this grouping. The fact that multiple exercises and multilateral exercises have been carried out by this grouping. They talk about counter-terrorism. They talk about disaster relief, whatever they may do. The fact that there's interoperability in these nations, the area in which they operate, that's India's backwaters. That's also an area where China is trying to make inroads, and that is where China feels extremely threatened, especially with the intelligence sharing, with anti-submarine warfare, service navies operating together. And that is where China knows that the moment it crosses the Malacca Straits, enters India's backwaters, then it's actually dealing with multiple navies cooperating very close together, whether it's the United States of America or Japan or Australia or India. They're all operating in tandem, in sync about every movement, and that's critical.
Gaurav, thanks very much for joining me on this. Remember, the Prime Minister will be addressing the Raisina dialogue very, very shortly. It will be the Prime Minister's second address of the day. It's been a politically very satisfying day for the Prime Minister and his party, the BJP, over political performance in the three big state elections in the Northeast. But he's got his hands full today with the Raisina dialogue and the G20 because he is, after all, playing host. That big speech is coming up by the Prime Minister very shortly. These are some of the big events that have taken place around the G20. Come right back. We'll have the Prime Minister speaking live and also a big press conference by the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. All of that and much more in our continuing broadcast right here on India Today. Stay with us.
जैसे सबसे तेज आपकी टैगलाइन है, तो इसी तरह से सबसे तेज हमारी सरकार की लाइफलाइन है.
Leader must have a vision. We will continue to work with the developing and the developed world for win-win solutions.
Nature had of course willed the survival of the fittest.
हम आतंकवाद के खिलाफ जीरो टॉलरेंस की पॉलिसी को अपनाए हुए हैं.
एक साल के अंदर राहुल कन्वर की कार जो होगी वो इलेक्ट्रिक की होगी.
There is a confrontation of competing visions.
Arnold Schwarzenegger is back. The Terminator star is all set to return with an upcoming comedy series titled Fubar.
I'm back, baby.
The drama will address normal family concerns set against a worldwide backdrop of espionage, action and humor, forcing characters to work together as partners.
Back, baby.
Oh, that's what you get for being sentimental. The 8-episodic series will also feature Monica Barbaro, Jay Baruchel, Fortune famester Milan Carter, and Travis Van Winkle, among others. Fubar will premiere on 25th May on streaming giant Netflix.
I'm back, baby.
Oh, that's what you get for being sentimental.
In a crowded place, can you just imagine? It's unparalleled, the way it all just happened. If you can't have
Wow singer Sabrina Carpenter and Shawn Mendes are reportedly dating, and the couple was spotted strolling in Los Angeles.
asking what it's like to be loved like this, to be recognized behind the scenes, make me vulnerable, you make me so vulnerable.
I won't lie to you.
The Treat You Better hitmaker was spotted wearing a pair of blue corduroy pants, a white shirt and a shearling-lined jean jacket for the outing, while Carpenter kept things casual in an oversized black sweatshirt and sneakers.
And you're spending all your time in this wrong situation, and anytime you want it to stop, I know I can treat you better than he can. And any girl like you.
The news of their dating comes as a surprise after Shawn Mendes was reportedly linked romantically with his chiropractor Dr. Jocelyn Miranda. According to reports, the couple has been spending a lot of time together, following Shawn Mendes' split from Camila Cabello after 3 years of dating.
I'll stop time for you. The second you say you'd like me to.
रुख जिंदगी ने मोड़ लिया कैसा, हमने सोचा नहीं था कभी ऐसा, आता नहीं यकीन क्या से क्या हो गया, किस तरह मैं तुमसे बेवफा हो गया।
This short video has made Amarjeet Jaikar an overnight internet sensation.
मेरे सामने थी जो वो गली जिसमें रहती थी एक परी, उस पे मैं मर मिट गया।
Jaikar, who lives in Bhavwa village in Samastipur district, has been singing for 7 years. After the new video went viral, Lady Luck has smiled on him. Bollywood actor Sonu Sood is giving Jaikar a chance in his film Fateh. Jaikar is also exploring other options.
मैं अपना चेहरा देखा करता हूँ। कहते हैं ना कि एक बिहारी 100 पे भारी, तो एक चीज़ बहुत अच्छा सर ने लिखा था और मुझे ये नहीं पता था, मैं आपको कसम से बताऊं कि वायरल हो जाए मेरा वीडियो, ऐसा मेरा कुछ सोच नहीं था। बस ऐसा था कि फेसबुक जो होता है ना कुछ अर्निंग देता है, तो मुझे उसके बारे में पता चला, तो मैंने सोचा कि हाँ मैं वो करके अपना कुछ अच्छा कर पाऊँगा, तो बस करने लगा, वीडियो अपलोड करने। नेशनल लेवल में अभी मैंने राइजिंग स्टार, सारेगामापा, इंडियन आइडल में मेरा इस बार सेकेंड राउंड तक मेरा हुआ था, उसके बाद फिर मैं चला आया घर। आने वाला पल जाने वाला है, हो सके तो इसमें जिंदगी बिता दो, पल जो ये जाने वाला है।
Jaikar credits his teacher for his success.
जाने वाला है। हमारे विक्की भैया थे, तो मैंने इनको बोला भैया कि मैं भी गाता हूँ, कि आप मुझे सिखाइएगा, तो बोले नहीं तुमसे कुछ नहीं होगा, ये सब जो करता है बड़ा घर का लड़का करता है, जो संगीतकार का बच्चा होता है वही करता है। बोले नहीं हम पूरा इनको रो के बोले थे, आप शायद इनको याद होगा। फिर 2 दिन बाद ये मेरे पास आए, बोले कि कैसे बजाते, तो मैं सारेगामापा सब वो उल्टा गलत बजा रहा था। तो फिर इन्होंने मुझे प्रारंभ जो होता है ना शुरुआती का सब इन्होंने मुझे बताया, फिर मैं अनेकों गुरु से सीखना स्टार्ट कर दिया। तो सबसे प्रथम गुरु हमारे विक्की भैया। जिए तो जिए कैसे हाय बिन आप।
Jaikar's father runs a hair salon in the village.
लगता नहीं दिल कहीं।
It was when his father bought him a mobile phone that he put it to good use, shooting videos of songs with his scenic village as the background, which have now become a rage. Jaikar aims to support his family with the earning from his singing career. Bureau Report, India Today.
And Prime Minister Modi has just tweeted his congratulations to BJP karyakartas and workers on the election results in the three big northeastern states. Celebrations have broken out at the respective party offices in Nagaland, Tripura and Meghalaya. The Prime Minister, for instance, on Meghalaya has said, grateful to all those who have supported BJP in the assembly polls. We will keep working hard to enhance the development trajectory of Meghalaya and focus on empowering the people of the state. I'm also thankful to our party workers for the effort they put out. On Tripura, he said, thank you, Tripura. This is a vote for progress and stability. The BJP will continue to boost the state's growth trajectory. I am proud of all Tripura BJP karyakartas for their spectacular efforts at the grassroots levels. And in Nagaland, where the BJP is in alliance with the NDPP, he said, I thank the people of Nagaland for blessing the NDPP-BJP alliance with yet another mandate to serve the state. The double-engine government will keep working for the state's progress. I laud our party workers for their hard work, which has ensured this result. Let's go straight across to India Today's Preeti Chaudhary, who's been leading our broadcast through the day today and decoding these results. Preeti, the numbers are still firming up in some ways, but the mandate appears to be clear. There is talk of a big BJP celebration in the national capital as well. What are you hearing? How is the BJP looking at these numbers? Are they happy?
Well, Shiv, first up, I would hope you give your voice a rest. You're sounding quite bad there. But the numbers firmed up, Shiv. Now, most seats have been declared. Very few leads are left, one or two here or there. So, the election has been called in all three states. Tripura, 32. Seats have gone out of 60 have gone to BJP. So BJP clearly over the halfway mark. 30 was the halfway mark. And that's the reason why you have this tweet by the Prime Minister where he says, thank you, Tripura. This is a vote for progress, stability. BJP in Tripura will continue to boost the state's growth trajectory. I'm proud of all Tripura karyakartas for their spectacular efforts at the grassroots. So this is Tripura, BJP's home. And Tripura was very important, Shiv, for the Bharatiya Janata Party. Understandably, a party in 2013, 2% went to 2018 to 44%, practically taking the entire Congress vote base with it. Many had called it an inorganic growth. So for this, it's consolidation by the BJP. It's consolidated on the vote it got in 2018. So it's a big one for the Bharatiya Janata Party there. On the other hand, Shiv, it'll be interesting because if you look at these three tweets, now this is a tweet which calls out the win, thanks the Karyakarta, says we're going to do a great job going ahead where Tripura is concerned. On the other hand, you have this third tweet which he's thanking the people of Nagaland and blessings to the NDPP. He's in alliance, which is the BJP's in alliance with the NDPP there. The BJP right now has zeroed in on 12 seats in Nagaland. So that's not bad at all. And with the NDPP, they are well over the 34 figure. So, they're in majority. They're going to form the government there. He says that this alliance is yet another mandate to serve the state. The double-engine government will keep working for the state's progress. I laud our party workers for their hard work, which ensured this result. So, he's talking about the double-engine growth there as well. But what's interesting also is right on top. Now, that is his last tweet, which is Meghalaya. He says, grateful to all those who have supported BJP in Meghalaya. We will keep working hard to enhance development trajectory of Meghalaya and focus on empowering the people of the state. I'm thankful to our party workers for the effort that they put in. Meghalaya, Shiv, the BJP, which looked as if it would have trebled its tally, it was 2 in 2018, has now wrapped up its tally at 3. So it's increased by 1, but still 3 is rather less, but enough for it to form the government with the NPP. Because the NPP is at 25 right now, so plus 3, and with a few more in independence, BJP, there would be an alliance, but the alliance hasn't formed up. So that's the reason why there is no congratulations to the NPP. So, wait for that tweet also to come up, how the alliance comes together in Meghalaya.
Okay, Preeti, thanks for rounding that up for us. The Prime Minister will be headed to the BJP headquarters in the national capital a little after 7 p.m. It's been a very busy day for him. But remember, this is the first set of elections in 2023. The road to 2024 has begun in right earnest, and the BJP will milk this to the hilt. They see this as a big political message that 2024 is a done deal. Look at how 2023 has begun. All of that will happen at the BJP headquarters starting 7 p.m. with the Prime Minister there. Preeti will bring you that special live broadcast at 7 p.m. Don't forget to tune in. Up next after this very short break, remember, we're waiting on the Prime Minister's big speech at the Raisina Dialogues. Gaurav Sawant takes you through that special broadcast on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
Have seen Iron Man Tony Stark wear it to reach war zones. You have seen Shah Rukh Khan and John Abraham wage a war in the sky wearing these. Jetpack suits are now going to be part of military drills and rescue operations. The Indian Army will soon adopt jetpack technology. These suits will be used for enhanced tactical mobility on line of actual control amid border tensions with China. The Indian Aerospace Defence News shared a demo on Twitter of its jetpack flying over a water body, buildings and fields. Soldiers will be able to fly 10 to 15 meters in the air by wearing this suit powered by a gas turbine engine. They can clock a speed of 50 km per hour. Jetpacks were the center of attraction at the Aero India 2023 held recently.
अगर टेक्नोलॉजी के बारे में बात करेंगे, ये पूरा टर्बोजेट इंजन से चलता है. इसका डीजल फ्यूल है. हमने डीजल इसलिए चूज किया कि डीजल का जो फ्लैश पॉइंट एंड फायर पॉइंट है वो नॉर्मल एविएशन फ्यूल से काफी आगे है.
Jetpacks are being tested by armed forces across the world. These videos from the UK highlight the features of the technology. In the first video, one can see how a soldier lands on the deck and drops a ladder over the side for the...
Ranked number 1 in ease of doing business. All these speak volumes about how proactive the state is, especially when industry representatives now are part of the procedure which actually awards ease of doing business.
Andhra Pradesh, we have the natural advantage, especially for logistics sector. We have the excellent opportunities.
Infrastructure is very, very stable. So that's the reason why we decided to invest more business unit and bring from Japan.
So come over to Andhra Pradesh, have a feel of the state, and I assure you that you would enjoy the way forward. And we are here to give you an experience in Andhra Pradesh that would be different from any other state.
Welcome to the Andhra Pradesh Global Investors Summit 2023, March 3rd and 4th in Visakhapatnam. Come experience the Advantage Andhra Pradesh, where abundance meets prosperity.
I look forward to meeting you, all of you, once again in Visakhapatnam.
Foreign ministers of the world's most powerful nations are assembling in New Delhi for a G20 meet. Under the cloud of the
emperors of Rome.
Tom Hiddleston will reportedly reprise his role as the protagonist Jonathan Pine in the second season of Night Manager.
My name's Pine. I'm the night manager.
You bring the money to us, we give you back the boy.
You'll be in so deep, you'll worry that you'll never get out.
I got nothing to lose.
According to reports, the show will begin filming later this year in London and South America under the codename Steelworks.
My main man, my star.
I think you might be playing both sides.
We need Richard Roper.
I'm going to get you out of here.
The series revolves around Pine, a former British soldier and night manager of a 5-star hotel in Cairo, who is hired by the head of a foreign office team to infiltrate Roper's inner circle.
Anyone can betray anyone.
Penned by Farr and directed by Susan Bayer, the first season also starred Olivia Colman, Tom Hollander, Elizabeth Debicki and David Harewood, among others.
I'm the night manager.
You bring the money to us, we give you back the boy.
You'll be in so deep, you'll worry that you'll never get out.
I got nothing to lose.
You saved my boy. Welcome to the family.
The Hindi adaptation of The Night Manager starring Aditya Roy Kapoor as Pine and Anil Kapoor as Roper was launched earlier this month on the OTT platform Disney Plus Hotstar and will reportedly have a second season as well.
It's showtime now.
शैलेंद्र रुंगटा एक आर्म्स डीलर है जो लोगों के खून से पैसा कमाता है।
मुझे छू भी पाना इंडियन इंटेलिजेंस के बस की बात ही नहीं है।
शली की लंका गिराने के लिए मुझे अपना विभीषण चाहिए।
मेरा इससे कुछ लेना देना नहीं है। मैं कोई सीक्रेट एजेंट नहीं हूँ। मैं एक नाइट मैनेजर हूँ।
Armed with facts, she takes the news by its horns.
You think the future of these students are not hampered?
Fierce, bold and direct, setting the tone for the biggest stories. From every corner and every angle. Expect nothing but the unfiltered truth.
News first, niceties later. Watch me, Nabila Jamal, on India Today.
Co-powered by Hyundai Ioniq 5, the all-electric SUV. Co-powered by घर लेना हो या बेचना 99 acres से ही पूछना. Co-powered by Aditya Birla Capital.
First India-China bilateral since the LAC standoff. Ukraine war divides the world.
You know, is the conflict impacting the global south? Of course it is.
Russia calls out Western hypocrisy.
Ukraine was slapped on the wrists. Everyone knows this. The United States, the United Kingdom.
Prime Minister says focus on what unites us.
We can reach this balance more easily by working together.
Vishwaguru Spotlight on India.
Hello and welcome. You're watching India Today. I'm Gaurav Sawant. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's word of advice to the G20 foreign ministers, a meeting that was attended by 27 foreign ministers and 2 ministers of state for foreign affairs. Multilateralism is facing a crisis. But the issue that we are raising here on India Today is the West holding the developing countries to ransom. What are the key takeaways? We'll discuss that in greater detail. I'm Gaurav Sawant. As always, let's get started with the headlines. India leads the global south at G20, says Ukraine war a make or break issue. Russia slams the hypocrisy of the West. External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar and his Chinese counterpart hold talks on the LAC situation. Clear edge for the BJP in Tripura. BJP leads in 34 seats. Left and Congress lead in 14. Thirpa Mota leads in 11. Modi's victory lap at 7 p.m. in Delhi. BJP NDPP near 2/3 majority in Nagaland. BJP hopes to form government with NPP Meghalaya. There's a split verdict. Supreme Court orders SEBI probe on manipulation of stock prices in Adani Hindenburg case, says report to expert panel within 2 months. Adani welcomes the move, says truth shall prevail. Big Supreme Court verdict on appointment of Election Commission Chief, says CEC must be appointed like the CBI Chief. Panel of Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition in Parliament and the Chief Justice of India must appoint the CEC. Bulldozers roll into Prayagraj for the second straight day. Another house linked to Umesh Pal murder accused raised. The house belongs to gangster turned Neta Atiq Ahmed's key aide. Is the BJP moving forward on government formation in Meghalaya? The Chief Minister of Assam, Hemant Biswa Sarma, has just tweeted that Conrad Sangma, Chief Minister of Meghalaya, called on Amit Shah, the Union Home Minister, and sought his support and blessings in forming the new government. So is the writing now very clearly on the ball? You have the numbers of Meghalaya right there on your television screen in Meghalaya. The Congress down to 5, NPP 25, BJP 4, others 25. 25 and 4. Is that the way forward? I quickly want to cut across to India Today's Preeti Chaudhary for more on this. Preeti, what does this mean?
Well, Gaurav, the latest that is coming in right now clearly seems to suggest that the BJP and the NPP are once again set to form government in Meghalaya after what has been a very acrimonious battle and a campaign where at one point of time Conrad Sangma didn't even allow the Prime Minister's helicopter to land, or to the Bharatiya Janata Party, calling the NPP corrupt, calling the NPP dynastic. But all of that clearly now in the past. A government is in order and Meghalaya is once again going to go with the BJP and the NPP combined with, in all probabilities, I would reckon Conrad Sangma as the Chief Minister. What is interesting here, Gaurav, is that as the numbers are now clearly firming up, 25 is what the NPP has wrapped up on, unprecedented in terms of even the NPP or Conrad Sangma would never have imagined that he'd be doing this well. So clearly by going solo, he's dug in his heels, he's done exceedingly well. Will this be a new chapter for the NPP where the Northeast is concerned as a party or a leader of the stature of Conrad Sangma?